Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm not actually sure how many people we're going to get on this live because, well, I kind of deliberately titled it something a bit boring. I used a big word like epistemology in there, and I made a joke that it was going to be about holiday slides and so on. Of course, OG people will be aware that's a little subtle chaos magic reference, what I did in my holidays. But the main part of this show is going to be about adventures, epistemology, and sacred travel, and so on. So if you are listening to this on the replay, you don't even have slides that you're missing this time. Like, this is literally just going to be me talking. And the only thing you will miss, which the people on the chat watching this live will get, is of course the Q&A at the end. Now, if you're listening to the audio version and you would like the Q&A, jump over to YouTube and there will be a little chapter title to jump you right through it. But hello, everyone in the chat. Good morning. See, we've got some Australians in the room, so they know the correct time, although I don't fucking know what time it is. Also, I got the jet lag in reverse. I'm like, oh, I'll totally be up early, except it's actually evening in South America, isn't it? So I should have done that in reverse. I should have done a live stream when I first got to Paraguay rather than when I'm back. But I don't know. I had a reasonable amount of sleep. I woke up at 1:30 in the morning. What is it now? 8. Stayed up for about 2 hours, got a little bit more of a nap. I've had some coffee, as you can probably tell. Moved back onto the terere. I had a night, almost 2 days. I had a night almost 2 days in Santiago whilst waiting for my flight across the Pacific. So obviously that's in Chile. And it's not like you can't get terere in Chile, but I was filming a video which will come out in a couple of weeks in a park in the middle of town near the Castel Hidalgo, if you know it. And in Paraguay, you just kind of, it's so fucking hot. It's the hottest country on earth, but you just kind of sit outside with your terere. So I'll hold this up. I just said to the audio people that you're not going to miss anything. You're missing me holding up my fancy South American thermos. You might have heard the water and the ice rattling there. You just kind of carry one of them around with you, with your matching huampa, which is what this is, and you just sit outside in the heat. I mean, under a tree, because you're not insane, and I'm white, and you just kind of sip on cold tea in the baking heat, and it's fantastic. You don't do that in Chile. It's far more civilized. It's like a normal country. And I had 1 day without the terere, and I missed it. Anyway, back now and back into the swing of things. The idea for this episode, you might think it would have come from the holiday / I don't know, field work. I have a joke about that coming up, but it didn't. It came from a conversation I had with one of my all-time heroes, if not my all-time living hero, Wade Davis. We were on the same call during the dark era of state imprisonments for an online psychedelic conference. We were in the same Zoom room, same Zoom call. And it was him and my shamanic healing teacher, Alberto Violdo, talking about their early experiences in South America and the Amazon and so on. Because they're both admirers of, that's an understatement in the case of Wade Davis, the first of the, maybe even the last of the great South American explorers, Richard Evans Schultes. And in fact, Wade Davis has an amazing book about him and the Amazon and so on. And at the end of the call, because they were talking about Schultes and they were talking about the Amazon and so on, and at the end of the call, Wade Davis said, like, how are you all doing? Because it's really awful here, because they'd just been talking about travel and going places. And of course, he's in Canada, aka Australia North, and he was going through a similarly demented time that we were down here. And so that kind of stuck in my head. Like, I'm not surprised that the National Geographic Explorer in residence was, let's say, on the right side of history when it comes to that kind of stuff. Not surprised. But it got me thinking about adventure and adventure as epistemology. And so I reached out to him and said, come on the show. And he said yes. And he was going to come on the show beginning of last year. Wade fucking Davis, right? Keep calm. Had to change because of travel to Colombia. And then obviously I got up at 2 a.m., I think, at the revised time for us to record. And he wasn't on the call, and I messaged him like, "Hey, Wade, are we still on?" And he's like, "Oh, he had like his daughter was in. I can say this, she's fine. Like his daughter was in a car accident. He's like, "Oh, I'm at the hospital. My daughter was just in a car accident." I'm like, come on now. I mean, I'm glad she's all right, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's one of the guests. If you have a podcast, this happens all the time, and it happens to me when I'm guesting as well. You arrange a time, and then life happens, and someone can't make it, and then you arrange another time. And if you miss that, if fate intervenes, you're never getting that guest. Let's just be honest. So I had all this material prepared for a show with Wade Davis about adventure, and it didn't happen. And then if you've watched the animism, almost like series 1 of my animism videos, the first 3 of them that I recorded at the beginning of this year up until a couple of weeks ago in Bolivia, actually, I quote from Wade Davis in every single one of those videos. And that's because I'd done all this. I mean, he lives rent-free in my head, always has. But a lot of that information was stuff we were going to talk about and so on. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. I've just finished a couple of grand adventures. And so I'm going to do this as a solo show instead. I'm going to do Adventures, Epistemology, and talk about what I used in the thumbnail, sacred travel. I want to talk about that as well. So in the unlikely situation that you are unfamiliar with Wade Davis, a lot of people in magic will know him because of Serpent and the Rainbow, which he wrote very, very young and was turned into a not great movie. But the book is a anthropological adventure exploration of basically zombies in Haiti, right? It's good, but it's also the beginning of his career. His South American stuff, particularly to do with Colombia, One River, and he's actually written a couple of books about rivers, but like the main river, the Magdalena in Colombia. And particularly the most recent one, or like the follow-up, when he goes back, is a really powerful meditation. Let me get exactly, sorry. Name, I'm still jet lagged. Name is blanking unless you know in the chat. Hang on. I also have a new computer, and it's a Mac, so I finally jumped back to my home territory, I suppose. But all the rest of the setup is PC, and it kind of works like the Bluetooth keyboard works. Like I connected, but it's just disconnected then. So I'm just gonna move over here. Magdalena, River of Dreams, because the first One River. What happened with his first book about the Magdalena in Colombia is that it was translated into Spanish and became hugely popular in Colombia as well. So this outside adventurous exploration of quote unquote foreign, I mean, it's foreign, but go with me on this, river and landscape and culture became immensely popular inside Colombia in Spanish because it was an opportunity to discover and fall in love with something that's familiar and unfamiliar. And that's where I wanted to open the show with Wade, because that brings my kind of trouble to the really cheap and lazy and easy, but not necessarily wrong, dismissal of the idea that adventure can be epistemology, that quote unquote white people, he's Canadian, but obviously the archetype is very 19th century, Dr. Livingston, I presume, that you can wander into lands that are foreign to you and have daring do boys' own adventures, and for that experience to be knowledge producing in a way that's valuable, because it is knowledge producing, like I just described the British Empire, right? And Wade is a really, really good river into, if you will, where that's true and where that's false, because it's not just that his quote unquote foreign work became culturally transformative in Colombia, he's also like an ambassador to the Kogi, and he has a more complex relationship to going and encountering people who are other to him than a simple dismissal of like, oh, blah, 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 blah. So that is where I wanted to start it. And especially as, let's pull adventure back from before the era of British empires. It's not, well, European empires. It's not like empires invented adventure, right? So there is something about being somewhere unfamiliar in a way that if not necessarily invites peril, but contains unpredictability that can be perilous, that generates knowledge, right? And this idea came up when we were all stuck in our homes and stuck in our countries, and we're using our phones to tell the government that we were going into big box hardware stores and all the rest of it. And it was the absolute nadir of the idea that unfamiliarity and peril can lead to new knowledge, because as Charles Eisenstein says, which he got from, I forget where he got it from, safety third rather than safety first is a very good philosophy for life. And I think that umbrellas under the idea that actually adventure can generate new knowledge about the world. So that's the intro, right? Like that's what I wanted to talk about. And I want you to sit with that idea because now we're going to do something, we're going to define adventure without slides and so on. This almost becomes a primary school project. Webster's dictionary defines adventure as, but the better version / the lazier version of that in 2024 is to ask a robot. So I asked ChatGPT, my future online girlfriend. I don't know if you watched the new announcement, but the voice response stuff is much more real time now. So yeah, now that I'm here at the end of the world, edge of the world on my own, I might get a robot girlfriend and just wander around this wizard hut talking to her. But for now, this is from ChatGPT, my future girlfriend. Etymologically, it originates from the Latin word adventurus, which means about to happen. I like that. So adventure comes from the Latin for about to happen. The term is derived from advenir in French, right? A combination of ad, which is to, and venir, which is come, implying the arrival of something new and unforeseen. In the 13th century, the Old French word aventure was used to describe a chance occurrence or a remarkable incident, often involving risk and daring. So it is a positioning or a relationality to the future in a way that invites chance to bring you something good. It sounds like magic, right? But it's not. I mean, it is, but it sounds like magic. And when we get to the etymology of it, it's like, so it's a positioning around something new. Historically, the notion of adventure has evolved. In medieval literature, it referred to the quests undertaken by knights and heroes, filled with trials and challenges that tested their valor and wit, charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent. I added that bit, but my actual girlfriend would know the reference. These narratives emphasize the unpredictable and often perilous nature of adventures, highlighting the idea that true knowledge and growth comes from facing the unknown. Then I asked it about misadventure, because I thought, well, is this new? And it's the same. It's like 13th century. Etymologically, misadventure combines the prefix mis, which indicates error or wrongness, with adventure. Thus, it refers to an unfortunate or unlucky event. The term entered Middle English in the 14th century from the Old French mésaventure, denoting a mishap or accident. While adventure is often associated with positive connotations of discovery and growth, misadventure reminds us of the inherent risks and potential for failure accompanying any quest. So what I want you to take from my robot girlfriend, take my wife please, is it is a positioning. It's almost daring the future to bring you something new, but in a gambling way, because you have to table some kind of risk. There has to be some sort of peril. And that has a real charge for me, because especially over the last few years and heading back into it, safetyism has destroyed all life and color. And consequently, it has prevented the future from bringing us bigger boons, bigger gifts than we might otherwise have, depending on what we were willing to table, what we were willing to ante up to sit down and make that trade. And that sucks, right? That sucks. And something that I was going to mention to Wade, but I mean, it works better on the solo show, to be honest, is something Peter J. Carroll said in, I think it's in Liebe Null. Anyway, it's either that or Liebe Chaos. It's the early 80s books that he holds at arm's length these days. They're 40 years old, so he should, in the sense of his thinking is allowed to evolve. Wizards should have adventures, in the sense of there doesn't really seem to be much point in fucking about with magic if you aren't going to do something interesting with your life. And this was in reference to what he did in his mid to late 20s, I think, when he lived in India and Australia for a bit and built boats and sailed down the coast of India and all that kind of stuff, and cut his teeth on probability enhancement and so on at the time. And that, because I read it as a teenager, that really struck me. It's like, wizards should have adventures, as a matter of fact. It's almost the archetypal defining characteristic of them. So what does that look like contemporaneously? What does that look like? Perhaps David should have at least sent Gunga Jin. I'm holding out hope that I will get him on the show at some stage. But I couldn't wait this long. And also, I've literally just come off a whole bunch of fucking adventures. So it's top of mind. But that's in reference to some chatting. Wizards should have adventures. In the 21st century, in the year of our Lord 2024, what does that look like? What can that look like? What does that most typically look like? And can we be cynical and say, well, is this just a holiday? But see, this is what I did on my holidays, right? Like, first of all, holidays comes from holy days. So there's a charge behind how that word has tumbled down to us as well. But there is nevertheless more to that criticism. So I want to talk about a couple of times, we'll start it off here. I want to talk about sacred travel. And I want to, like, the question I had for the thumbnail was, is sacred travel over? Well, first of all, what is it? And on the one hand, all travel is sacred if you do it right. But the thing about adventure that I want to avoid as we look at adventure as epistemology in this episode is I don't want you to come away with the, well, it turns out the real adventure is just the sitting on the couch justifying myself that actually my life is an adventure anyway we made along the way. Because that's wrong. You can't just, I remember, this is weird, but one of the things that just is lodged in my mind, when I lived in Parnell in Auckland, which was lovely, very wealthy suburb on the side of a volcano, Sir Edmund Hillary died. So the guy, the first probably person ever, because the locals would never be so presumptuous to climb to the top of Mount Everest. There was always that almost like Buddhist idea of you'd get near the top, but you wouldn't mount the whole fucking thing. Anyway, if he wasn't, he was the first Westerner to climb to the top of Everest, and he's a Kiwi. So his funeral was at the cathedral at the top of the hill in Parnell. So we went to it. Stood outside. We weren't. It's not like we were sitting there with his family. And I remember looking at some, because this is still, God, whatever this would have been, 2006, right? People on Facebook, because I was still using it in 2006, talking about, or complaining, like he was like, a state funeral. Yeah, he climbed a mountain, but other people do things like they have their own mountains to climb, like recovery from addiction. And I'm like, hang on a minute. You are equating a human physiological world first that no one's ever managed to do with someone managing to resist having that third cookie. So what I like focusing on the etymology of adventure as you anteing up a certain amount from the future and saying, all right, I'm in this. You can kill me. I mean, you can kill me any day. The cookie can and will kill you. But I don't want, as we massage the edges of terms like sacred travel and adventure for you to come away going like, oh, I guess anything is an adventure. Because your entire incarnation is, sure, it's one big camping trip, but it doesn't, you're not going to get any transformational capacity or charge out of making an adventure the equivalent of like, oh, you know, raising a family. And raising a family is an adventure, but it's not climbing a mountain. And it doesn't mean that climbing a mountain is better. It's, you need to be able to distinguish between different things if you're going to do them right. So on the one hand, sacred travel is any travel if you do it right. But on the other hand, flying into Cancun on an all expenses paid trip from the US to stay with 15 of your closest friends in one of those, which I've been to a conference at, where you wear your wristband and everything in the hotel, you just eat and drink. And that's, you are on sacred Maya land. I don't think that's sacred travel, right? And if you've never traveled before, and actually if your friends are going and the deal is good, fucking do it. Doesn't mean don't do it. But if you say all travel is sacred travel and that's how you travel, we're missing something. We're not in the right area. I don't think that's what Pete Carroll meant when he was building boats and sailing down the coast of India. So there is a difference. And the way I like to frame or position the difference is sitting down with the future, like playing chess with death, sitting down with the future and seeing what you can ante up to see what the future can, right? And if that's the case, then so sacred travel is, this is the other part of sacred travel that's problematic that we want to talk about. Is it just going to Machu Picchu, right? Like, or visiting Stonehenge or what have you? And in that case, is it over? Because I haven't actually been to Machu Picchu, but if you go to those 4 or 5 sites in the world that are supposed to be like, oh, this is it, right? They're awash in tourists, obviously. So at that point, it's not like you hacked through the jungle and scaled the mountain and came upon this lost city, right? So is sacred travel over in 2024? Well, I don't think so. I think it shifts. I think the era, so let's take it back to the mid-20th century in the 60s and the Orientalizing interests, Beatles, transcendental meditation, and all the rest of it, heading to India for a year and living in an ashram and learning meditation and so on. That obviously has colonial antecedents, but that was sacred travel then. You can still do that. Like you can still visit Machu Picchu, but the charge, the thing that you are gambling with the future, that you have to pay less at that particular roulette table. And so if you move through the even like 70s version 1 South America, Terence McKenna, and so on, same thing. Then in the 90s, you get the more literally kind of like menopausal post-divorce women spending a year in Tuscany. Then you get Eat, Pray, Love. Then you get Joe Rogan ayahuasca. Each of these things are all still have their own legitimacy. But you see, if we move it through time, the charge shifts, right? And if you consider it like gambling with the future, the experiment at La Chorrera, when the McKenna brothers did that, they anteed up more, right? Because they were, and it's funny, that's changed a bit because I actually briefly thought about going to La Chorrera on this trip, but it's on the Colombia-Ecuador border, more or less, which is explicitly one of the areas any State Department will tell you please not to go at the moment because of the cartel activity moving drugs up and into the US. So it's like the charge has shifted. So La Chorrera has been, not colonized, that's the wrong word. La Chorrera has a different charge with the future. So I wouldn't go for mushrooms. I would go for like McKenna worship. But then it's like, well, I don't want to get abducted. Like that, the equation shifts there, right? So sacred travel, I don't think is over, but I don't think it's one thing. This is like almost animist read on it. Like it has to shift to what do you ante up in order to bring something back? It's very Joseph Campbell hero's journey, right? Like, what do I bring back to the tribe? How do I shift the charge on that? Which means it's, for a lot of cases, I would say 2/3 of the cases, it's a Bildungsroman, right? Which is a term I learned, funny enough, from the Hobbit tarot card set that Los Scarabeo has, which isn't, the art isn't great. And I'm still going to do that video for Miguel about how the Hobbit movies are better than the Hobbit book. That'll probably happen next month, actually, now that I'm back. But there's something about the primitiveness of the Hobbit as a cosmology that really suits these cards. And they had this whole thing about a Bildungsroman, which is like a German combination of words for a like a coming of age story, but it focuses on the psychological and moral development of the protagonist, who is typically at a coming of age moment, which, I mean, I think Bilbo was in his 50s, but that was that for a Hobbit, right? So they go out and they grow and they develop and they learn things and they bring it back. And so I would say, because still 27, that is an archetypal shape that I would say matches the development of the coming into adult consciousness that I think underpins a lot of sacred travel. Now, something, speaking of Charles Eisenstein, that I learned a couple of years ago, at some point you have to step away from the hero's journey archetype developmentally. So typically when you have hit your 40s, because the hero's journey is Luke Skywalker in the first film, you leave home and you go out there and you become an adult. But at some point you archetypally move into, it's almost like moving up from page to knight to king or queen in the tarot. Their agency, the combination of their agency and capacity shifts, right? So at some point if you don't want to stay in a postponed adolescence that is actually psychologically inhibitory, you have to move to you move out of the hero's journey shape, because you in theory have built your life. But then what kind of adventure do you move into? That doesn't mean you stop having adventures. It's like, because again, thinking about Gandalf's old as fuck. But Gandalf's adventure is different to Luke Skywalker's adventure. And that's where, like, a Bildungsroman is 2/3 of it. And it's one that, depending on your age, is useful to think about when it comes to adventure and sacred travel and so on. But for my own experience, and the other, I guess, origination of this solo show is last year during a members Q&A. I think I just come back from Vanuatu, and someone said, how do you like meet these people? How do you, when you're going out to do this field research, this book research, Island of the Witches in the Philippines and whatever, like, how do you meet these people and it happens? I'm like, well, I do magic for it for a start, but it got me thinking about the difference between adventure versus research. And God, there's so much more to come about my, I did a bunch of videos in the Andes and so on, which after the course that we're doing at the moment will come out over the next 4 or 6 weeks. You learn different things when you adventure versus when you do, which by the way, people fucking don't anymore. Like archaeology and anthropology departments just don't do field work. They do research or meta-analysis, and the field work they do is contained within their idiotic and timid belief systems anyway, so that you might go to the Solomon Islands, but you will do like like a Marxist analysis of the role of women's work and in the weaving of baskets that are sold at a market. So you're not going to learn about women and baskets and so on. You are analyzing the economic inequalities of the number of hours women work at a market. You see what I mean? Like, you actually haven't left Berkeley if you do that. So coming back to, well, if you're not tabling up risk, the universe is just going to give you back what you ante. Like, you're not going to, you can't double or nothing or whatever. If you go out looking for a post-capitalist economic inequality when you're in the Solomon Islands, you'll find it, and you'll find nothing fucking else. When I was up in the high Andes, in the villages of the Kayawayas for healing purposes and to learn a little bit from one of these Kayawayas, I'll explain that in a minute. His daughter said, oh, and over there, a couple of mountains hence, is the ruins of a fortress that Huascar and his court fled to. Now, that's very interesting because Huascar is a being in my healing lineage and was, when the Spanish showed up, he and his brother Atahualpa were in the middle of a civil war, and Huascar was in Cusco, and Atahualpa was sort of expanding the empire up through Ecuador in what is now Quito. Huascar dies. Huascar gets beheaded in Cusco. And in my healing tradition, that's like a deliberate death, so he takes that knowledge into the underworld. But the Kayawayas, the reason they're so famous around the world and in Bolivia as healers is that they have an unbroken lineage from before the Incas and down to the Inca. They were the midwives of the Inca, which means king themselves. So there's this unbroken knowledge going back 1,000 years through the Inca Empire and its collapse. So and they went to the valleys that they're in now with the fall of the Inca. So if anyone is going to know what happened to the court of Huascar, it's these people. And they said it's never been looked at. It's never been excavated or anything. And she knows where it is. So we didn't have time, myself and my friend and translator Julian, on this trip to do it. But we both like, what the fuck? We'll come back for that. And this is a good example of that versus the Solomon basket weaving Marxist analysis. Is I didn't see no fucking archaeologists up there. It was just wizards. Julian is a Mexican daykeeper, amongst other things. So it was him and me having an adventure and a healing experience, because that's what I went to actually visit the Kayawaya for. So adventure yielded a lost fort that may or may not change Inca history. And I'm just going to leave it like that. And we would not have known that had we not been living with them in there. Like I was sleeping in a stable, right? At 4,600 meters. That's anteing up. That's an example of that ante up, that daring the future by a process or a ceremony of adventure to bring you something new. And I was teasing, I have an archaeologist friend in Sydney, and I was teasing him going, I didn't see no fucking archaeologists up there. Wizards 5, archaeologists 0. And that's like step 1 to how you learn these things is have an adventure. The next is be friendly and interesting. So how do you do adventures epistemology? How do you make the universe teach you things about itself by having adventures? Now, this sounds obvious, but we haven't made the connection. So let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, I met a guy down here who's Argentinian. So an Argentinian in Tasmania is quite exotic. So he was fun. Like if he wanted to do something, I would suggest stuff, but he'd message me going, hey, because he was job hunting or something, like, what are you doing this afternoon? I want to go and see this blah, blah, blah in Oatlands. And I'm like, you know what? That actually sounds fun. And it is fun. You know what it's like to help someone in your life who is exotic to your situation, you know, but you can sometimes forget that actually that works in reverse. Like you can randomly just ask people. Now this comes back to the American in Cancun versus American in Villarrica in Paraguay. You are not exotic in Cancun as an American. And if you just randomly ask some local, hey, can you like show me those ruins over there? You might deserve whatever happens to you consequently. So this comes back to the charge of what are you anteing up? But places like Paraguay, they're like, yeah, like that sounds, obviously I'm not going to pay for it, but cool. Like, oh, I'll help you with this. So a really, really good random example. When I first got to Paraguay, because of the whole food plant-based thing, I needed a blender, a liquidora. And if you know anything about whole food plant-based food, you need a high-powered, like a Vitamix kind of thing. Vitamix you cannot get in Paraguay because it's expensive in the United States. It's like a car in Paraguay, right? So I had to find what was the most expensive / most powerful one that was available, and it was in a department store, or a department store chain. And I went to the first one, and they thought they had it, and they didn't. And the guy working there, the kid working there, who spoke a little bit of English, a little bit more than I spoke of Spanish, which is like 100 words, right? Just helped. And he helped in the sense of like, oh, the other store is only like 1/8 of a mile away. like, we'll just go, and it wouldn't ring up in the right till, so he took me to the children's wear, and it was an online price that was no longer available, so we got the duty manager from a different store. And it wasn't just for a sale. Like, this guy just like helped. And I would do that. But you would do that, right? Like, to find out you've got an Australian here who needs this for like dietary reasons, that be friendly and interesting charge is available. The other example, the Vanuatu example that started it all. So I went there last year because I wanted to go to a particular island that is famous for sorcery, for book research. And the week before I got there, there was a big cyclone, big hurricane. So you couldn't get to that island. And in fact, the main town was a bit, the casino I was in had its, the pool had been destroyed, and there was like a hole in the wall and what have you. And the electricity went off a few times and so on, because it had just been fucking smashed by a cyclone, right? However, the security guard at the front door was actually from the island of the sorcerers. And I said, oh, I'm trying to get to your homeland. He's like, yeah, you can't at the moment. I'm like, I know, I came here to do research for the blah, blah, blah. And so he gets on his old phone and starts texting people in town. And it turns out there were a few elders who were in town for like a, I don't know, sacred elder meeting business. And with a bit of work, I got to spend some time with them talking about their plant healings and whatever in the main city, rather than going to the town, rather than going to the island, because I couldn't get to the island. So the whole trip wasn't actually a wash in that sense. And this is that it helps if you can be exotic, but just be like friendly and interesting. Just talk to the fucking guard. Or as an example, in the clapped out casino that you're staying at by the docks in a in the capital of Vanuatu. That one's very specific to me. I get that. But people don't, you are gambling with and tangoing with, even speaking of Argentinians, the unknown. So lean into that charge. Most people aren't psychopaths, but also some of them are. And that comes back to the whole, well, you have to be tabling some sort of risk, you know? So be friendly and interesting is one of the ways that adventure-verse research kind of works. The other one, and this helps to work for yourself, is time and flexibility. Now, before I came back to Australia, because I love this, I love planning, love it. I used to joke in London that I derived, and it was kind of true, as much enjoyment from planning a fucking holiday to Rome or wherever than actually doing the holiday. Like, I love planning holidays rather than sacred travel or whatever. And so consequently, every time I would go somewhere in Europe, it would operate with military precision. Now, I wasn't working for myself at the time, so I had a fixed amount of annual leave. And that kind of helped me, that put the pressure of maximizing the amount of stuff that I was doing into those, 10 days, right? When you work for yourself, especially in a digital capacity, you can be a little bit more flexible with it. Like, I obviously worked when I was in South America, and not just because there was research for the book. Like, I had clients doing shows, doing member stuff, right? So time and flexibility helps. This is the other part of getting the universe to play with you this was a big learning for me, because actually one of the reasons, coming back to like autonomic health and so on, one of the things you do to manage anxiety is overplan. And I've spoken to Ivy about this as well, because she has a similar personality type of the love of the shadow side of a love of planning is fear of the unknown. So you can still be afraid of the unknown, but you are tangling with the unknown if you're doing adventure. So you have to be aware of what your patterns are. And post returning to Australia, my travel has been increasingly flexible, to the point where when I went over to South America this time, I didn't have a return flight. And that freaked me out. Like, what? What if planes stop? Yeah, it's not. When you ask yourself, well, is this fear rational or irrational? It's like, you'll be able to get a goddamn plane at some stage back to Australia, which of course I did yesterday, and that turned out to be fine. But time and flexibility is required this is like magic 101, right? The universe has to be able to respond and adapt to you in a tango. If you are within an annual leave context, that just changes the framework of how you do the adventure, so that it might be a multiple trip situation. And what I would do in that case is that trip one would be like, go and befriend people, literally like go somewhere. And if you only got 10 days, like focus on the friends, right? Because then you can maintain contact with people and come back and so on. And that almost shifts how you would do time, or shifts how you would let adventure bring you stuff even when you are here versus there, whatever, right? And the other thing about that is, this comes back to the risk again. Like, I made a couple of jokes about this, but I mean, I flew back Boeing. I have more to say about the Boeing thing. Ask me about that in the Q&A, because I think that's a deliberate destruction of that company, simply because all the stories that we hear about Boeing, that shit happens all the time in travel, which is my point. Like, travel's not safe. In that respect, all travel is adventure. But the doors flying off and, you know, tires blowing out and planes having to come back, that happened. I remember like reading, I think when I was still in travel media in London, this seems like a lot, but maybe it isn't. At any one time, there's 1 million people in the air. That's a lot of planes. And they are mechanical devices. Like, stuff goes wrong. So I remember joking with my friends in Paraguay before coming back. It's like, are you flying a Boeing plane? I'm like, I am flying 4 Boeing planes back of various ages. Like, are you worried? I'm like, no more than you. Like, no. First of all, life continues after death. So if this is how I leave, this is how I leave. But second of all, something else is going on with Boeing, and like, you're not going to do much other than, you know what? If you have a choice of actual plane types in the United States for domestic travel, and the planes have been built within the last 10 years, then sure, pick an Airbus, because actually the older Boeings are fine. Like, the problem is a management level in the last 8 years. But the older planes are fine, especially if the airline itself is reputable in the sense that it maintains its planes. And that might surprise you, because once again, the Western carriers, Qantas is all right with it, although it's got some problems at the moment. The Western carriers are the ones that will inevitably cut corners with that. I've flown Air New Guinea, and it was I forget the name, it wasn't a Boeing, it was some Dutch airline or Dutch aircraft manufacturer that hasn't been manufacturing planes since the 70s or something. And it was the most immaculately maintained, I think because they only had 2 or 3 aircraft, planes that I'd ever been in. Of course it would be, right? If your fleet is 3 planes, you take good care of it. So Boeing and risk and so on. That was a little bit of a side round into how to do adventure, sacred epistemology, travel, time and flexibility, be aware of risk, be prepared for the destruction of things. Fucking hell. And some of this was the Mercury retrograde, and this is why I have a new computer. The last one that I bought, and it was almost 2 years anyway, which is a bit short for me. Like, I like to replace a laptop not every 2 years, because what does that work out to be? About $1,600 per year in laptop cost. I'd like to bring that down to about $800 to make it a 3-year process. I'm not that bothered by it, because I am a knowledge worker. I live on my laptop. So it was a bit too early, but it was fucked the whole time. And I know that's a really boomer thing to say, but James is very technical. And whenever something would go wrong and I'd be upset, I'd be upset. I need you to come here and look at this and tell me to my face that this is unusual, rather than like, oh, computers don't like me. I'm like, they actually kind of like me. This was a dog of a device. And like, by the time 2 days ago when I was in Chile, the sound wouldn't work on it. You have to turn it on 5 times for it to ever actually like try it. It's almost like turning over an old car. It's like, please just last one more day. One more day so I can get back. My drone is fucked. The gimbal is fucked on it. What else? Oh my God, clothing. In my case, the last couple of big adventures have been across different climates. So Paraguay is the hottest country on earth, but I was also at almost 5,000 meters in the Andes. So very, very hot and steamy and wet, really, really cold, everywhere in between. And the amount of things that just happen to your clothing, but also of me, like, be prepared for the destruction of things. When I was in the mountains, I was very disappointed. I was expecting more plant-based protein because it's a largely, when you come into it, you're like, oh yeah, they're in the Andes. Like they eat potatoes and they eat quinoa and so on. I'm going to be fine. It's a largely fucking vegan life anyway. It is no longer. And so everyone else, and largely plant-based is different to completely plant-based, so that they would eat trout from Lake Titicaca and they brought meat up and so on. So I would just eat like, this happened all through South America, but they were so bewildered. The further down in South America you get, the more meat-based it is, obviously. So the further down into the cone, it's just fucking cowboys. So it's just meat. So that was very confusing. I'd had people say like, but you can have chicken. It's like, no, anyway. So after about 4 days in the mountains, I was extremely protein. I was protein deprived the whole time in Bolivia, which is not good, generally speaking. But I'd actually done my best. Is a really good example. I'd done my best to say, okay, well, there's not that much protein. So I bought a whole bunch of like a little bit too high salt, but like black bean cans, like La Cholula chili type cans to just take up to the mountains that I could eat straight out of the can if I needed to. And Julia, my translator's wife, came with us. She doesn't speak a word of English. She's Mexican. She's lovely. And in order to help out, she'd be like helping the Kiowa, like women stuff, like cooking and so on. It was wonderful. Anyway, I'm like, listen, I'm really protein. The biggest meal of the day was lunch. I'm like, listen, I'm really protein stuff. I'm just going to get those beans. And she's like, I'll get them. And she said, no, just let me eat the fucking beans. So protein stuff. But they just gone through like meat and fish and so on. I'm like, listen, I can't just have the side salad and another fucking potato. I'm climbing goddamn mountains. So she cooks up the beans and I'm like, okay, like, because she wanted to, Julian's like, let her cook the beans. Right. And then she starts, which kind of makes sense, handing it out to everyone. Like, and so she gets the bread and puts a little smear of the beans on it, hands me, and I'm like, give me the pan. What are you doing? And I had to get Julian to translate. Like, you've just given me nothing but like flour and a smear of beans as you're handing out my only protein to everyone else. Bitch, come on. So, and when we got to Lake Titicaca, it was the same thing. James could eat the trout, and like the food in the Andes is actually fantastic. If you live there, like if I'm buying my own stuff, it's fantastic. But of course, restaurants are catering to stuff that people want. Ain't no fucking vegans in the mountains, let me tell you. So I had the same problem once we got to Lake Titicaca. So by the time I get back to Paraguay for my last 10 days to do the first filming of the course, I'm like, I am so protein deprived and protein starved. I'm not going out because I know the supermarkets and the markets I like in Asuncion. So I'm like, I have my liquadora, which is my adventure story. I'm just going to go and do all that. But the other thing in terms of risk of destruction of yourself, amazing, I'm still only 27, but like once you are in your 40s. So at one point in Lake Titicaca, I got up before the sun to go and do a ceremony at the birthplace of the sun. And there'll be a video about that coming as well. So by definition, it's very, very dark. And I'm scrambling and walking on these really uneven and treacherous stone paths that like you could twist your ankle in at the best of times in broad daylight. And I'm on my own. And I'm like, everyone else on the mountain, everyone else kind of in the area is in their late 20s doing a backpacking trip. And I'm like, when you fall and break a bone in your 20s, it's a different recovery than if you do in your 40s. So that was one of the be prepared for the destruction of things that only occurred to me as I'm like, all right, off. And I'm like, wait a minute. I should be less cavalier. Should be less cavalier with this because everyone else bouncing around like mountain goats. If they break, it's an easier process of recovery. Like if I break wrong now, well, that changes adventures for the rest of the life, doesn't it? So that was a really fun kind of like be prepared for the destruction thing. So I've come back. My drone is destroyed. I have a new laptop, which I'm actually very happy about. But the clothing and so on, which brings it into, do you need money? Well, the short answer is yes. This is almost back to like annual leave versus can you work somewhere and travel and all the rest of it. But if you need money, which you do, Paraguay is the second poorest country in South America. It is cheap as fuck. You can live there. Ask me how I know. You can live there better than a local for $500 US a month. They paid more than that because they had a nicer apartment. But like last time, you can do it. And that's not just, oh, it's 500 rent. It's like, no, that's what it costs. This time around, because I had friends and was drinking. Last year I wasn't drinking. That helps. It was more per month. But you can't dismiss like, oh, it's all well and good for you. Like, I don't have the money for an adventure. I'm like, then don't pick Italy. Don't pick France. All right. It's not like I'm not hanging out with fucking Lady Gaga in Paris. I'm renting on the edge of the nice part of town, but I'm renting an apartment on the edge of the nice part of town in Asuncion. So yes, you do need money. So factor that in rather than dismiss the process of adventure accordingly, right? And that, in my case, that means, and I've done this my whole life, is go to countries that have, except when I have to come to the US for work, like, but go to the countries that have weaker currencies than yours. Like, this makes complete sense to me. Americans going to Europe now, I'm thinking they discover it. Like, but going to Croatia is actually cheap, but like, it boggles my mind. What are you doing queuing up with other Americans to see Dublin Castle when you could be, I don't know, wading through hot garbage rivers in the main streets of Asuncion? That's just, I like that stuff. That's me. But when it comes to the destruction of things and resources and clothing, that's what turned it oddly from, because I was there for so long. I was there for 2 haircuts. That's how I could tell. I was there for so long that you go through the destruction of things and you end up having to buy stuff like South American clothing or what have you while you're there. So that was kind of adventure versus research, be friendly and interesting, time and flexibility, be prepared for the destruction of things. I like the components to how you do that as adventure. So now I do actually want to tell you about what I did on my holiday. So I'm going to move into the holiday era with gratitude for all the beings and places and people that I met. And so the first round was in Paraguay. This is mostly for book research. Now, I have a podcast that I actually recorded late last year with the producers of Magical Egypt that I haven't put out because I want to put it out at the same time as a video that I want to do about Hermeticism and Hermetic laws, because that's a really good combination. And I haven't filmed that yet. So anyway, one of the things, because I live in Thailand at the moment, that they said, which really struck me, because like, why do I keep going to Latin America in particular? I love Latin America, I always have, but why do I keep going to Latin America to work on the books? And what I learned from Chance and Venice is what Chance in particular likes about living in Thailand is that he doesn't speak the language, like learning, because you live there. But it means you can sit in a cafe or a bar working and be surrounded by the buzz of life, but not have your unconscious suddenly just like pulled into or distracted by the stuff that goes on around you. Because I live obviously very remotely. And so when it comes to certain aspects of the creative process, it's wonderful to be around life. But that just really clarified something for me. It's like, well, yeah, but I've got life here. It's 5 times the cost. But it's not like I can't go up to Hobart or Sydney. And I do, to sit in cafes and bars and so on. But he said, no, you're actually like weirdly distracted by, particularly if you're in a focused part of your creative process. And I went to Paraguay this time knowing that, like, I wonder if that's correct. And I think it is. I think that, so my Spanish is better, and I have committed to actually learning it properly with like courses and online tutors and so on now that I'm back. But I almost was saying this when I was over there. This is my excuse for not being good at Spanish. It was like, yeah, but it impedes my creative process, because if I start to understand you monsters, then you will become distracting. And I don't know. I think there's something to that. There's an old like Muslim like folk story about the creation of the Sahara that I learned in like speaking of National Geographic, like a National Geographic VHS documentary when I was a kid, that Allah created the cosmos, and then he needed somewhere to walk in peace where he wouldn't be bothered. So he created the Sahara. I'm not, I don't need a fatwa, so I'm not suggesting that I am Allah. But when you hear stories like that, you have there's something archetypally true about that. So it's almost like a free from distraction idea which makes sense. I thought that's what it is. When you have somewhere that's non-distracting to live and work most of the time, like a little permaculture farm in southern Tasmania, that's wonderful for the creative processes that need quiet and isolation, but it's fucking terrible for the parts of the creative process that don't. And it's been a game of like learning which one is good for what. And I think that's just baked into how humans do things. And that is reflected in the story of Allah and the Sahara. I hope that's a folk story and it's not in the Quran. I don't think it's in the Quran. I think it's a folk story from North Africa. But apologies if I got that wrong and that's offensive. So that was kind of like my going back to Paraguay was part of that. But there was also Paraguay-specific research for the next book, which is on cunning traditions, which needs to happen, coming back to adventures. The version of, and there'll be more about this in the book, obviously, but a cunning person in Paraguay is called a medico ñaná. And ñaná is a Guarani word, which basically means plant spirit. So a plant spirit doctor. And the practice is very similar to, this is why I have the book, faith healers in the Philippines and what have you. And one of the medico ñaná I was speaking to, and I won't give you any more details on this for reasons that will come up, met her and she agreed that I'd come back with my two translators, one who spoke Guarani and one who spoke Spanish, the next week. And so we show up and she was so excited. She's like, this is great. I'd love to talk to you because what I would like is more people to know about it because I want universities interested in it to see if they can fund research and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, cool your jets. This is going to be a video on my YouTube channel, and then it's going to be in a talismanically published occult book, which it's not exactly J.K. Rowling in terms of popularity because it's the occult, right? Anyway, we show up, and my two translator friends are obviously Paraguayan, and we walk in, and then they kick us back out, going, oh, we need to clean. So they kick us back out into the courtyard and lock the door. Like we heard the doors lock behind us, and we're like, something's going on here. And then they sent out quite literally a crazy lady. She was wonderful. One of those grandmothers, the style. This woman was in her late 60s, and evidently so am I with my references. Do you remember the band Frente in the 90s, like with like bucket hats and like almost like 70s style floral prints? She looked like that in bright yellow. She looked stunning, frankly. Like the style on this lunatic woman was off the charts, like yellow Crocs and a hat. It was brilliant. Anyway, she came out to say, oh, they're not going to talk to you. Well, she booked it and so on. Anyway, it transpires that the house that this woman is operating in is owned by the Russians. And I don't know if she's got like a Britney Spears captured situation going on or what, but as soon as they saw the cameras, and by the way, my camera is a little Osmo Pocket. It's the size of a vape, a vape pen, essentially. Freaked out and wouldn't speak to us. And that's like, okay. And by the way, Asuncion, Paraguay, one of the reasons I like it is it's a lawless pirate dystopia. So when they say the Russians in a context like that, I think we know the sort of Russians they mean. So we left. But that's kind of, adventure stuff, right? That was quite fun. That was the point of it. And then I was there for, like I said, 2 haircuts. I got another haircut when I came back. And they're long enough to be sick, which is interesting. And especially when you're much more terrain than you are germ theory, which made sense because I was in a warmer climate and had been like losing more weight because you just do that when you're on adventures. And that meant that you were dumping out toxins into the blood, which means you had to, it was just a fascinating sort of experience to kind of go through. And then I went to Brazil. And I'd never been to Brazil before. And so I went to Brazil to see my friend Julio and his wife Clarissa. He's been on the show a bunch of times to do more of the Kimbanda, Umbanda research, not just for the Grimoire course, but in general. And funnily enough, a friend of mine and Guy, who's Brazilian, who lives in Asuncion, we were driving out to Kimbanda in Asuncion one night. And he said about Brazil, this is just before I left, he's like, Brazilians don't actually think they're Latin. And he told me this famous story about it was some American Airlines flight coming from Rio, flying into the US, and filling out the like arrivals card, having to select an ethnicity, and the Brazilians being outraged because they didn't consider themselves Latin. They didn't want, they didn't want to check Latin America in it, which seemed hilarious to me until I got there. And I'm like, one, it's basically a Western country at this point. And when I say good for them, I'm like, fucking live your life, Brazil. But it was not, I know it's a different language, obviously, but that's not what I meant. Like the country, certainly after coming from Paraguay, which is at the other end of the development scale, it was just normal. There's like multi-lane highways and what have you, which I don't know what I was expecting, because Julia and Clarissa live in the south, so I was expecting something more mountainy. I was expecting something more less developed, but actually it's mountains like, oh, this is sort of German. You know what I mean? This is actually quite developed, and that would surprise me. And they've actually had, unfortunately, last week or the week before, very serious hurricane, and a bunch of people have died. Julia and Clarissa and their property and whatever is fine, but like where I was, if I was there a week later, very, very, very different adventure. But that was accidentally really useful for the grimoire course. Like I was going mostly just to see Julia, because I was like a half a day's flight away rather than the 3 days that I am now. And we got to hang out, and that was lovely. But they kind of arranged like a fiesta, like Kimbanda situation one night while I was there that turned out to be really, really useful experientially for a bunch of reasons that will come up in the grimoire course, which has started, by the way. And the members area stuff will unlock this weekend. But there's another video coming today or tomorrow that will be public, and then the rest of it you'll have to join us for. So after that was Bolivia. Bolivia I didn't love, which surprised me. But in a way is good, because I used to joke that like every country I go to, I'm essentially just interviewing it to see whether I'd want to live there. And it's nice to find South American countries that I don't want to live, because I love Paraguay, I love Ecuador, I love Peru. Probably wouldn't live in Brazil, but that's just because it's like, well, why? It's basically Western. Didn't love Bolivia. Bolivia is just kind of like a shit Peru. And when I say I didn't love Bolivia, it has all the worst parts of socialism, but they still don't own their lithium. So when I say I don't love Bolivia, it's not about the Aymara people or any of that culture. The state apparatus, the tyranny floated over the country like a fog, like a smog actually is better. So just dumb shit, like you have to give them your passport randomly, not at every gas station, but if you want to fill up with gas, it's like, oh, can I have your passport? It's like, why? Well, you need it for gas. I'm like, I don't think you'd. And just that kind of demented, unnecessary surveillance. On one of the last nights, we're staying in a nice hotel in La Paz, and I came downstairs from the room waiting for let's just call it an Uber. It's not, it's in-driver. Anyway, I was waiting for my taxi to show up to take me into Centro. And I sit down on the couches, and like I'd clearly come from the lifts. Like I'd been there for 2 weeks at this point. And a woman at the front desk was like, hi. And I'm like, hi. And she's like, what room number are you? And I said, why? And she looked at me confused, like she thought I said one. I said, no, why? ¿Por qué? Why do you want to know my room number? And she was just bewildered by the question. I'm like, no. Like, I didn't wander in off the street. I came downstairs. I'm plainly Caucasian. What information, what do you need my room number for? And she just wanted it. No. At the end of the fucking holiday, no. That kind of demented, nothing work. Like, so you have paperwork like you wouldn't believe to do anything, which is the socialist nightmare. But anytime they get close to electing someone indigenous who's like, right, we've had 5 centuries of our resources being extracted for European and American powers, that's coming to an end. Well, then they get the fucking coup treatment, don't they? So it's not necessarily Bolivia's fault that I didn't love it, but I didn't. That was part of it. And so the many, many police checks as you were driving along the road, for instance. This is a good example of like, okay, so, and I know exactly why, CIA, blah, blah, blah. Like this is the originator of most of the coca that goes up the nose of spoiled Europeans. And like, I'm trying to drive to a Kayawaya village in my rented van with a Kayawaya family, and I get stopped 5 times, and I have to walk out and hand them my IDs and so on. Now, I happen to have, for reasons I will not tell you, because you can get anything in Paraguay, I happen to have a Paraguay driver license. So if anyone asks, I'm a resident of the fine city of Luque, and that was useful. But every time they saw the Paraguay license, they go, Paraguay, and they were like really excited by it, which is it's a fun word to say. I think that's part of it. But Paraguayans don't really travel. It's a poor country, and even though Bolivia is right there, it's in between Bolivia and Paraguay. In the north of the country is a land called the Chaco, which is the land God likes the least. Let me just say that. And actually, Bolivia and Paraguay fought a war over the Chaco in the early 20th century. Paraguay won. It's a strange country where, because it's had so many bizarre calamities, like losing 90% of its male population in the War of the Triple Alliance in the 1800s and so on, that it's frozen in these moments of its relationship with the rest of South America that no one else cares or knows about. So my friends were joking with my Paraguayan IDs. Like, don't be Paraguayan when you're in Bolivia, because they hate us because we won the Chaco War. No one I spoke to in Bolivia had any knowledge of the Chaco War, except for, and this is really sad, that the Kayawaya's daughter who knew about Huascar's temple, fortress, I was trying to explain this story and the Chaco War to her. And she said, is that the war where the Bolivian government rounded up innocent people on the Altiplano, which is where she lives, like in the mountains, and forced them to fight in a battle where it was so hot they just died of the heat? And I'm like, yep, that's the one. But so that's Bolivian government for you, losing a war to Paraguay, rounding up harmless fucking quinoa farmers in the mountains and forcing them into, like, the Chaco is God's blighted land, let me tell you. And so when the Paraguayans didn't kill them, the heat did. Fuck. I don't know how anyone can be anything other than anarchist. But yeah, so Bolivia, when I say it was kind of a shit Peru, I think they know that, because when we were driving to the Kayawaya village, there's only one place where you can get fuel in between La Paz and getting to the mountains, so that there is enough fuel in the fucking car to get to the village and back. Because it's like, when I say it's up, at the final police check, we were at about 4,600 meters, and I turned the van off to go and hand in my Paraguayan license. And I couldn't get the fucking van, because it's like, let's go. And because if he wants to see my passport or whatever, it's going to be a different story. And it wouldn't fucking start. Of course it wouldn't. There's no fucking oxygen that high up. Anyway, so it's real adventure stuff. And the gas station that we needed didn't have petrol. So I'm like, well, what do we do? Like, we don't have enough. We sort of have enough to get back to El Alto, which is the ghetto at the top of La Paz. But we wouldn't be able to make it to the mountains. And he's like, no, we'll go to this village, this town that's on the border with Peru, on like the north side of Lake Titicaca on the Peruvian border. He said, because it's near Peru, they'll have fuel. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, oh, because Peru is the country that has it together versus that and Bolivia. And we went to Peru after Lake Titicaca, and it's true. Like, you don't really notice it, but like the roads improve. This is the road border. The roads improve, and obviously the food and everything's better. So we get to this town, and it doesn't have a gas station, but it does have this very large and friendly abuela who is selling gas out of plastic barrels beside her trout restaurant. So that's where we got fuel. That's kind of like so Bolivia is already like Ecuador, like already living in that collapse, which I think I'm very fascinated by. Like, these people already know how to fucking live when there's no fuel at the gas station, and Westerners, we don't. Like, you've seen the TikTok videos of people ripping up bolted down chairs in a Chick-fil-A and throwing them at each other when like a sandwich is 30 seconds late. Like, we're not set up for what's happening. So Bolivia is this awful veneer or smog of a terrible combination of the worst of like domestic socialism and American imperialism over the top of just really holy shit, like Lake Titicaca and like Aymara culture and Tiwanaku civilization and all these really fucking amazing things. So it's very discombobulating, and you have to intentionally be like, I'm here for Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca and so on. But you have to differentiate it because it's quite unpleasant. The rental car experience was the worst of my life. We got scammed. It was awful. I'm going to do in multiple languages reviews across every review platform about never fucking use Europe car in La Paz. My La Paz friends, my paseñas would say the same thing. Like, no, I tried to use them once, and like I was in tears when we had to leave. By the time the plane was leaving to take me back to Asunción, I'm like, I'm ready to leave Bolivia. The Kayawaya experience was powerful. Lake Titicaca and the Island of the Sun were things and Tiwanaku, but Lake Titicaca and the Island of the Sun, one of those places on earth that I just never thought, like, I can't believe I'm here. Like, I can't believe like the level of gratitude, because it is exactly as advertised. Like, it really is the creation of the sun. It really is like, it's all that stuff that you want it to be, like powerful, powerful stuff. So if Bolivia is on the bucket list, Bolivia should not be on the bucket list. Lake Titicaca, Aymara culture, that should be on the bucket list. Like, manage the expectations that way. We didn't go to the Uyuni salt flats because I don't give a shit. I have salt here, right? I'm much more interested in, and that's more that the difference between travel and adventure. If you are a fucking travel vlogger, you have to go to the Uyuni salt flats, right? I don't care about that. I care about the birthplace of the sun and lost civilizations and all of that kind of stuff. So I went in the opposite direction. And definitely those bits are worth the singular challenges of operating inside Bolivia, but still worth it. And that comes back to the adventure stuff. So from there, we wanted to get across to the north side of the lake in Peru to Puno, because I wanted to see Silustani, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And we had the rental car, but one of the many things that was wrong, you can't take the rental car into Peru. And I'm like, then why the fuck do I have this fucking thing? Anyway, I hate that woman. So we had to rent, we arranged a couple of different drivers to get us through the land border. So one was Bolivian, one was Peruvian. And I remember coming back from Puno, and I'm like, so I've got to do this driver and then the next driver going across the border. And then I've got to get my car and I've got to drive that back through El Alto, driving in El Alto. So La Paz, let me tell you this story, is in a valley. So that's the capital. And La Paz keeps, like no other city on earth, it's poor people at the top because the weather is worse up there and the altitude is worse. It's not just the highest capital or administrative capital on earth. It's actually the city on earth with the greatest difference in altitude. So the top of it is like 4,000 meters or 4,200, something like that. And the bottom is like 3,400. So all the rich people are down, like the nice area is in the lowlands and the poor people are up the top. So consequently, you're this wild, it's kind of cool actually, largely lawless ghetto running up the sides of this steep Andean valley and tumbling out over the top. That's what you have to drive through. And it's, if you've ever driven in Latin America, that's one thing. Mexico's different. I actually like Mexican driving. Fuck. That is Olympic level car rental is trying to get out of or into La Paz through El Alto, because there's no like rules on what kind of buildings. You just build whatever the fuck you want. Like streets close on different days for markets. It's an Indiana Jones travel sequence, put it that way. Anyway, so there's this weird moment when you're doing things that are, I guess, ambitious. Like, okay, so I've got to get in this car with this strange man and cross this land border with the police and then get this and then do that. You just kind of take it moment by moment. Like there was one day there, I was like, fuck, this is a stretch even for me. You just take it moment by moment. So I'm just going to do this bit and not think about the other bits. And then you compartmentalize the challenging parts of the adventure. But the second we got into Peru, into Puno, The food, like Peru is the best food on earth. I don't care what anyone says. The food was better. There were actual whole food plant-based options that contained protein. And we went to Puno because I wanted to go to Siustani. And it's because in my healing tradition, this is a place where the shamans who stepped outside of time come back. And I've got another video. Actually, this won't be public. That experience, because encountering those beings in that place was like a final unlock for the blended cycle model course that I'll be doing next year. But in the Telegram group, I'd forgotten this. If I ever knew it, I probably did back in the day. That's where David Icke went. And depending on how you want to phrase a story, lost his mind or became a mystic or whatever. And in like a stone circle at Siustani is where he had that weird moment of like being out in the rain and experiencing himself as God and so on. So that was like a fun, like, oh, cool. David Icke came here and either lost his mind or became the David Icke that we know. And well, I don't know your opinion on David Icke. So that was cute. And the other thing we were doing there, and there will be a video about this publicly, was the floating islands. And that's a really good place to talk about the difference between travel and sacred travel and adventure, because most of the videos or travel vlogs or blogs you will see about it is like, oh, it's a bit touristy now. And it's like, what? You expect to be the fucking first white woman to encounter these things and peel back the beads coming into their house and find them they're eating soup. And then later in the day, they're going to make you their chief. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, these people have a fucking business. Like, they live weird and wonderful. Like, I wasn't sure. You hear some things like, oh, it's all fake. Like, they actually live in town and they get the boats out in the morning. Like, fuck, they do. They actually do live out there. And in previous centuries, they would sustain themselves by hunting and fishing. And now they sustain themselves by hunting tourists, like by showing us stuff and selling us tapestries and whatever. And people are like, oh, they just take you there to like sell you things. I'm like, yeah. What do you think this is? What did you think was going to happen when you get out to these floating islands and you're just like gawking at someone's home? What do you think the next step is going to be? Like, this is their fucking job, you idiots. Like, anyway, so I have a whole video essentially ranting about that. Like, oh, it's a bit touristy. Like, they take you out to the islands and then they keep trying to sell you tapestries. It's like, what did you think was going to happen when you got to these floating islands and bothered people in their home? Like, not bothered, like, this is my point. This is their job. Their job is like, here is my home. These are the things we make. Buy them. Anyway, it's just a really good, this is coming back to his sacred travel over. Like, shit travel, unfortunately, isn't where the sacred travel is. And if you think going to the floating islands in Lake Titicaca is some sort of adventure quest sacred travel, then yeah, you are doing it wronger. Like, simply that. Sorry, there will be a whole separate rant video about it. It was an amazing experience. If you do go and do it. But like, yeah, this is how they make their money now. And why I think that's so important is they ended up on the floating islands because they got sick of the Inca fucking with them. So they moved onto boats about 100 feet or so offshore, which, by the way, is the most Futurama solution I have ever heard, because fucking hell, Inca, get it together. They're 100 feet away on a boat. But that was apparently enough to stop the Inca harassing them. And so they stayed out on the boats, and the boats gradually became floating platforms that they built houses on, and that's how you have the floating villages. So at each stage, and they stayed out there because they kind of got sick of the Spanish as well. So at each stage, this has been an adaptation or a relationality to a change in conditions. And the next one is the arrival of white people like me who are super interested in this. And we have, I mean, I only got back yesterday, but I'm going to move these three. If you're watching the video, you can see that I'm pointing to my three different depictions of the sun behind me. They're going to go there down the vertical side. And I have from the floating islands a tapestry that they sold me that will go there, right? Like, that's what avoiding the Inca and that's the economic reality that is required to sustain the way that they wish to express their culture now, which is to live on these islands. And it's fucking cool. Like, we went there on a Sunday morning, which I thought was like weird. Like, they're still going to let us in. They're like, yeah, it's fine. And it was, because we actually got to see them living Sunday life. So they have a fucking soccer field. There's a floating island soccer field, and actually it was kind of cute because the age range would have been from like early 20s down to like 11 or 12. So it was like an all age sort of like village soccer boys situation. It was kind of adorable to watch. But it was that and people going about their just like Sunday shit, like buying stuff. It was really, really wonderful to see. So definitely fucking do it. But the point is, this comes back to almost like the products of thought way of thinking, animist idea of what gets to survive. And that's actually what the video is going to be about. So each island has its own essentially president, because you have like 2 or 3 families living on one island. And two recent innovations in the last, I think, 20 years was that women can now be presidents of the island, little island, floating island as well. And the president gets a cell phone. And that's it. There's one cell phone per floating island. I'm like, that seems a bit weird. Why only one? And they said, because it makes them lazy. And they actually literally still live by the 3 Inca laws, which is don't steal, don't be lazy, don't lie, which is fantastic, by the way, as a set of laws. But the risk the mobile phone is a adaptation to the modern era while still allowing them to live by the Inca customs that they live by. And I'm like, sweet. And you know how you managed to do all of those things? Intentionally, and doing stuff like selling me fucking tapestries, because you can't, sadly, like anywhere else in the world, sustain yourself eating the fish of the lake because it's kind of polluted, right? Like, and also you will overfish the lake. So in order to live on the islands, they have to sell me tapestries, is my point. And this is kind of coming back to sacred travel will look different because life looks different because life is in flow. So to round it out towards sacred travel and magic, if you're looking at, okay, cool, I do want to go to Machu Picchu though, Gordon. So you're saying I can't because it's not sacred travel. It's like, no. When you're looking at sacred travel, you want to ask yourself, what are you discovering? And that is for the world, which is something I'm doing with like the Medicoñana and whatever in Paraguay, or it's for you, which is the eat, pray, love, getting over a terrible husband. Like, what are you discovering unlocks sacred travel? Because the white people who complain about going to the floating islands and being annoyed that they're selling them stuff, it's like, you have failed to discover the world and your own, dare I say, privilege. So you're not doing sacred travel because you have failed to answer the question, what are you discovering? How do you discover things? This comes back to adventure as epistemology, as daring the universe to bring you new things by putting stuff at risk. So what are you discovering? Because inshallah, right? Like World War III, blah, blah, blah. I will absolutely get to Machu Picchu one day, God willing, inshallah. And hopefully, maybe it won't be sacred travel. Maybe it'll just be a holiday with friends. But if you, like, having just wailed on like Americans choosing Italy or France and expecting it to be some sort of impossible or I don't know, life-changing cultural adventure, like it's not the post-war era. It's not going to be that. But like it can be if you can, and I have a higher bar for this answer. Like if you can answer, what are you discovering in the context of, oh, well, I live in Jersey and I want to spend, that's actually a really good example because you probably have an Italian heritage. And it's like, well, I'm going to go and see, I know my German and Irish filth from family-wise from where I live here in the United States. I would like to know my Italian filth. So I'm off to like Southern Italy or Sicily. That I will allow, right? But what are you discovering opens up the, allows you to see, am I doing sacred travel or am I doing holiday? And once again, listen, holidays are good, relaxing stuff. Coming back to the beginner version of all expenses or all inclusives better. All-inclusive Cancun hotels with your friends. That's not sacred travel. Doesn't mean don't do it. You'll have a fucking blast, right? But let's not pretend that you're there exploring Mayan culture, right? Sacred travel can and must change across time. So pilgrimages, Middle Ages, now as well, like they're still in the mix, right? 60s, Orientalism. Then we move into like Eat, Pray, Love. Then we move into and have moved out of like the Rogan ayahuasca period. And at any stage, all of these things are all still in play, right? So what is this going to look like over the rest of the decade as we move into worse fucking times? Well, that's a good and serious question. But if you focus on what am I discovering, then the destination may change because of circumstances. Like, I don't think, no, I'll save that. I'll save that for the geopolitics. But there are sacred sites in the Middle East, let's say that if you haven't seen yet, I'm not sure you'll see. But what are you discovering? If that was like a lifelong dream, what are you discovering that they instantiated, that they represented? That question can lead to, because the cosmos is still going to exist, right? So it's still going to respond to adventure. So I think that's the key for adventure as epistemology meets, well, what happened to sacred travel is whenever we complain about cliched sacred travel, it's because we are looking at an old version of it that is no longer in play in the way that it used to be. And that's fine, because like the floating islands, like the cosmos updates, but adventure is how you unpick that novelty and generate more new things, more new knowledge in the cosmos, right? So this comes back to, can you use adventure as epistemology in your daily life? You can, but this is that I don't want people to go, okay, well, what am I discovering? I guess I'm discovering stuff about myself. So we need to be able to make a distinction so that we have the right risk profile to get the universe to respond. Because if you want to say, what I would like to, I've never read The Lord of the Rings, first of all, then what are you doing listening to me? I've never read The Lord of the Rings, and on my next like winter break, I would like to sit by the fire and read Lord of the Rings. And if that's you, I would like to hold your hand and do the same thing while you do it. Is that adventure? It might be sacred travel because you are discovering the imaginal, but the risk profile is not sufficient to allow it to be compared in the same way as, I don't know, like going to Africa and trying iboga. It's not, they're both, that's adventure, right? And it's an imaginal adventure. And it's probably sacred travel, depending on what, you know, what your version of sanctity is. So it's not that I'm ranking them hierarchically, because come on now, Lord of the Rings by the Fire, you're like, oh shit, maybe I should actually do that. It's not ranking them hierarchically, but it is separating them out for like sufficient differentiation, if that makes sense, right? So you can use adventure as epistemology in your daily life, but I actually think it's better like a suitcase kept for when you're actually doing actual travel, or when you're doing something new on a longer term basis. So here I am back on the farm, but when I first moved down here in whatever the hell that was, 2016, is that right? No, 2018. 2018. Moved back to Australia in 2016. Still only 27. So that first year I was down here basically on my own, because James would be down here for one weekend out of 3 and would otherwise be up in Sydney still working. And I had never owned a house before. And I had never, it's only 5 acres, but like I'd never owned a farm before. I'd never lived in Tasmania before. I didn't know anything. Every single fucking day was an adventure, because like I did everything wrong for like days at a time. So then adventure as epistemology is in play in your life, because you are embarking on some kind, you're daring the universe to do something new, right? So you can derive insight into it. One of Alberto Violdo's techniques that I loved from the training was a modification of that Buddhist idea of beginner's mind, so that you set an intention. This was really helpful for me because I did that training, speaking of the dark times when we couldn't travel anywhere. And I'm sure this was the case for my Australians and Australia North, aka Canada as well. So sick of the fucking sight of my supermarket. And I still am, but now I actually move into gratitude and be like, I am also grateful that I currently live with infrastructure that will allow the reasonable reliability of like foodstuffs delivered near me, right? But I was so sick of it. And that beginner's mind component of like, next time you go to the supermarket, walk in like it's the first time, not just that you've been in that supermarket, but that you've ever been in a supermarket. And that's really good stuff for relationships. Like he does that with his wife, which is hilarious. But like, wake up, roll over in the morning and look at the person next to you as if you've never met them before, and approach them in that kind of like you this wonderful, amazing being. Like, that's a lovely thing to do, right? Start with the supermarket. But so there are insights for so-called daily life that can come from this framing of what adventure as epistemology is. But I do think it's something that you should reserve for when you go on adventures, because that's when you kind of need it to move the universe some more. And yeah, so that would be the conclusion, right? Like, that's where I put sacred travel, and it's where I put adventure as epistemology. And now we have any other business, which is just before we move into the Q&A for the people listening. The course has started, like I said, and the other thing which will be in the audio version now is the Missing Witches Fundraiser, because it is May in earnest. So this is the time when you actually, the details will be linked up below, and it was in the previous podcast. Please, please, please do contribute if you can. It's a really good spell of transformation, like I mentioned last time. But if you're listening to the audio version of it, thank you so much. Thank you so much for hearing my stories of the trip and my thoughts on how I think adventure works and how it unpacks new things in the cosmos. And consequently, it's why it's something archetypally magicians and wizards should do. And now, if you're listening to it, you'll hear from the lovely ladies from Missing Witches, and I shall speak to you in the next one. And for the people in the chat, now we're going to do the Q&A. I just need to note the time, 9:30. So that's at about the 90-minute mark for my editor. Gordon White will eat straight from a can. Validation. I will, in fact, and unfortunately, so one of my secret shame foods, as disgusting food that you shouldn't fucking eat ever. Baked beans from a can, preferably the barbecue sauce one. In Australia, it's Heinz brand, but whatever. So right away, like salt, artificial, fuck, like high in sugar, high in salt, artificial, terrible for you. I don't like it heated. I like it ambient temperature. And when I say eat it from the can, what I actually do, this is so disgusting, but it's like a childhood, my mouth is watering. Toast, butter, which obviously I don't eat at the moment, straight from the can. So it's beans on toast, beans aren't hot, they're ambient. And then I eat the rest of the beans from the can. Why? Because this product, it's the same thing with anything tomato-based. Let me explain it now that we're in a culinary fancy way, having just described literally a hobo breakfast as one of my favorite meals, is when you heat, you lose all the flavor notes in tomato when you heat it too hot, right? Like, you know that from a pasta sauce, that actually a pasta sauce shouldn't be, I mean, I don't know, if you're a terrible cook, you probably serve the pasta sauce piping hot. But if you actually bring it down, not necessarily to room temperature, but like just have it warm over the hot pasta, then you get more of that flavor profile, the whole range, the high and the low notes. The same thing happens when you're eating garbage out of a can. So that's my justification for, like, when I eat out of a can, one of my favorite fucking meals is eating straight out of a can. Now in the whole food plant-based year, I cook, like I actually get cannellini beans and cook them in a compliant way. Like, so it doesn't take, it's delicious. And they're better for you. And I can eat unlimited amounts without guilt because it doesn't have the salt or the sugar. So I still eat baked beans, but I bake them myself, right? Or Boston, it's unfair to call them that because they don't have any of the meat and whatever in them. But my point is, I have a bean dish replacement that I eat now. But oh yeah, I eat out of a fucking can. I eat out of a can and tell thousands of people about it. I don't have that shame. All right. Yeah, 27 in tortoise years, or dog years, whatever it works. Solely Euro sidereal. I need to find a way to make that work. It's funny. So that joke, this came up the other day. That joke started when Colin and I were doing Fortune's Fools, because it's like a gay joke, right? Like pretending to be younger than you are. And then I went on higher side chats, whatever, early on in the Fortune's Fools process. And Greg made a joke at the beginning of like, he's done all this stuff and he's still only 27 years old. And a couple of people commented like, wow, Gordon's 27, he really has done a lot. I'm like, oh man. I am not. So that's where that joke came from. And like now I have to, it's weird because I love it. And now I have to, because I've included in some YouTube videos, and the YouTube videos get more of a new audience than the podcast does, of course. So I have to make the joke more obvious in YouTube videos in case people go, Jesus Christ, those were 27 rough years, right? Or more like, wait, does he think people are actually going to believe that he's 27? So the joke continues because it amuses me, but that's where it came from. Yeah. Heinz pork and beans in the USA at ambient temperature is bioengineered bliss. See, like I respect your choice there. I have never been able to find any of the beans plus ingredient combinations that have satisfied me as much as just the barbecue sauce beans. Never been able to find. But I appreciate that because my little brother, obviously we were raised in a similar, this makes it sound like we were raised on, I think the reason I like beans on toast from the can is because we would never get that growing up. But my little brother's version of it is he likes braised steak and onions in a can, which I think you should go to jail for, but he likes. So I appreciate your, and validate your Heinz pork and beans in the USA at ambient temperature choice. Any Expedite Adventures lore from this trip? No, but wait there. I did end up having to buy new Expedite toys because I had some operations I needed to do. So I've showed you this one, which I think is like fucking, this is this beautiful, hang on, let me hide my face. That's right, isn't it? Yes. This beautiful metal Expedite that I got in Paraguay. And I almost took off me because I had this in my carry-on and like, it's metal. I thought like, it's the most Catholic country in South America. And I'm like, what do you think I'm going to bring the plane down with this? And the woman got her supervisor over and everything. And it was eventually okay. And she said, that's beautiful, by the way. And I'm like, oh, you think we're the same kind of Catholic? I'm not sure we are. Anyway, I needed another one. So I have got myself a new dolly. So now I have two of them. And I'm like, do I have a Travels Expedite as well? But what I did get, and this has been helpful, this will probably come up in the Grimoire course, I'm not sure. The two genders of St. Cyprian. So let me hide my head again. All right. So you use one for Malefica and one for goodness. What I like about this one is it looks like he's holding Jung's Red Book, which is cute. And he's got a brazier, so brazen vessel, Goetia, etc. That's why I got this one. But that will come up in several weeks when we get to the Grimoire section of the Greek Inheritance of the Grimoires course. But no additional Expedite lore. I just had it doubled down on me from non-magical friends who came over and saw that and were like, oh, but like non-magical friends. So in Paraguay, people will appeal to Expedite in ways that we will as well, with like cake, and you have to celebrate him publicly and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, not the same like seeing big, I did still see signs in the street, but not like the big hanging out ones that I saw last time. The bronze guy is brilliant, huh? I know. Yeah. It's my favorite of my god dollies. Oh, and the other thing, I think I showed it, my thermo. So the Wizard Hut isn't on the same rainwater system that the farmhouse is. So this is southern Tasmania. So we have the cleanest rainwater on earth, which we fourth phase into the house. But the Wizard Hut is just on town water, which, what the hell? So I end up bringing water up for when I'm up here working. And when I saw this in Asuncion, I'm like, oh, this is how I'm carrying water around now. And this is like, I got it at the same place I got my hat at, which people were commenting on in some of the videos. Walking around with that thermo in Asuncion, it's like having a Bentley. Like people would compliment me in the street to the point that I'm like, am I going to get robbed? Am I literally going to get rolled for my thermo? And I didn't. I think it's a sacred object. I don't think they would. But it was really unbelievably validating to be like, wow, that's like the best demo I've ever seen. So, yeah. Even when you're on a super touristy trip, isn't it all about what your inner feeling and intention says about it? No, not all about. I'll get to the sigil question in a minute. It's not all about, because that's that whole, well, I guess the real adventure is the friends I made along the way thing. You need to be able to differentiate, especially if it's adventure as epistemology, because Wade Davis going to Haiti and writing Serpent and the Rainbow, stories of zombies and so on, that's new information. We learn something new about the cosmos because that's a thing he did, right? If he just went to Haiti and was like, I guess the real friends with the zombies I made along the way, it's a separate category. Now, when I say technically that's correct, it is correct because the book and the adventures can only arise from the combination of inner and outer experiences that he had during that particular mission, let's say. But this is what I want to avoid. I don't want people to, because otherwise you can just level it out. And it comes back to that, everyone climbs their own Everest in life. Like, fuck off. No, they don't. Like, they do, but also like one guy did actually climb Everest first, and today is his funeral. Like, we need to be able to differentiate and distinguish so that we can move the risk profile and have the cosmos to respond. But you were technically correct, because what you're saying is true of anything, like anything at all. What your inner feelings and intentions say about falling in love, having sex for the first time, whatever, that's technically correct, but we don't have the differentiator that we need to talk about things that can generate stuff, right? Like, is what was going on inside Gandalf's mind and heart the most important thing that he was doing during the War of the Ring? Like, honestly, you could make a low-key annoying case that is true, but it's not usefully true. Sigil making during travel was good for the most part. I didn't do any until I had to like smash a few out I thought I'd do more in Bolivia, right? Because the witches markets and so on, and I picked up a few cool things there. Do I have anything with me? No. But when I was on the Kaiawaya part of the trip, where it was healing and kind of like Mario's magic, I didn't do any there. Paraguay was fine because I was doing daily magic as per usual. So that bit was good. Didn't do any in Brazil. So it was the usual story of like stop, start. Now, I haven't done any because I was filming and doing more grimoire stuff for the last week in Paraguay and then the last 2 or 3 days of travel. This weekend, which I'm quite looking forward to as a way of like opening the wizard hut back up to magic, is going to be a little bit of a sigil palooza tomorrow morning, sunrise. So generally speaking, it went quite well. I didn't do any on Lake Titicaca, places where it wasn't like, I'm here for a different kind of magic. And I'm wondering if that's a learning for me for the Sigil a Day project is, I tell you what is a learning, is to not guilt about, oh, I don't feel, not like I don't feel like it today, but it doesn't feel right today to the, because I'm here on the island of the sun. I'm going to be doing a before sunrise ceremony. This, like, it doesn't feel, that's enough for one day. So that is a learning of like, well, if I'm doing other magic, maybe I won't, which is funny, right? Because I actually do them on client days, but that's a convenience thing because client days, now that I'm back on the farm, are in the mornings. Like sometimes the clients start at 5 a.m. So I get up, I won't now because it's winter, but sometimes I'll get up at like 3:30 or 4 a.m. And I come up here and open ceremony and whatever. So I have these big chunks of time where the temple is open, let's say. And so it's actually quite convenient to be throwing sigils at that point in between client sessions. But if you're like, that's a bit different to being on the island of the fucking sun in Lake Titicaca and be like, no, I'm just going to be present for this. So that was, if that's not a learning, it was more like, okay, cool. If it doesn't feel right for reasons that are justifiable, not like, I can't be fucked doing it today. That's fine on its own level. But if it doesn't feel right, I wouldn't do them. But actually, that's how I ended up with the travel dolly for Synexpedite is Synexpedite has been helpful in playing with time delivery for some of the sigils. And in fact, I will talk about that. Not now, but I will talk about that in a sigil video. It's been really fun, like seeing who's kept up with it and how they've kept up with it, because there are some incredible psychopaths in the Telegram group who, like, they're literally doing a fucking sigil a day and they have not missed a day. And most people are more hectic, like me, like, I think I need to do about 5 because I skipped the last few days because of life and what have you. But it's been really cool to see and hear different people's learnings and how they're expressing it. I'm happy with the project. What are your current travels, Paul? You said this is quite the pep talk. Where are you going? If you're still here in the chat. You just got back from Machu Picchu and hiked and camped on the top of Mount Pachustan. That's excellent, because that's exactly how I would do it. I would also do the fancy train, but like, well done. Went to several sacred sites off a dispatcher with the Kara. See, that's doing it right. Funnily enough, when I was in South America, Alberto was having a tour, like taking people on a tour, doing stuff like that. The timing and the money, the cost didn't work. He is a premium experience. And the money that would, like, the 4 days or something that I would have spent in the Sacred Valley on that tour is like all my time in Paraguay. At the moment, it turns out I like volume travel in the sense of like, as much as possible for as little as possible. It's not quite true, but I certainly do almost like measure the cost of experiences in how many weeks in Paraguay. I don't think anyone else in the world is doing that. It's like, 10 days in Fiji is, what would that be? 3.5 weeks in Paraguay. Like, I'm thinking it's a unit of travel currency for me, just because I guess I know it pretty well now, cost-wise. Yeah. Have you experienced the universe trying to redirect you but ignoring it to your detriment? For example, losing something and then making amends and working with the cosmos and getting the lost stuff back? Most of the time. So did I retweet or did I just like? I saw something, now that I'm back on Twitter, like, reasonably. Let me see if I can find it. I hope I retweeted it. I probably didn't. Damn it. It was something like, you should sit at the feet of your own life as like the ultimate teacher. And this is almost like what the previous questioner or commenter about, like, surely all travel is sacred travel. Let me just move tabs. Surely all travel is sacred travel if you're doing it right intentionally. Like, that's true. And this is the same thing, like, not getting what you want is only true, like, if you've lost something or, something hasn't come off. That's only true on, like, this dimension's level of experience. Jump up 1 or 2 and you not getting what you want is something that you and the universe together intended to happen for this moment in what we call time. So yes, and in fact, it is even if that isn't true, and it is, you might describe it differently, but even if that isn't true, that is still a better way of managing disappointment or unexpectation than not. But, like, absolutely. Have you ever experienced, like, every time something doesn't go exactly as I want, that is literally what's happening. It's myself and the universe, which is the one being, working something out, I guess. 3 sigils a day. Yeah, more than, like, this tomorrow will be 10's too many. So I might do what's today? Friday. 5 Saturday, 5 Sunday. Wait, but then I'll have to do Saturday and Sunday. fuck. It'll be something like that. 10 is potential. I don't think I could anymore. I could. That's not fair. I'm not going to close that down. I don't think I have 10 statements backed up. I think I've got about 4 that I wrote on the plane. So I'll kick the can down the road and do like 5 or 6, 5 probably tomorrow, and 6 or 7 the next day. And hopefully that comes out in the wash. That will actually work because like I'm still jet lagged. I don't know what other than like the course and all the rest of it now until the end of June looks like for me. So I can do the backlog today, Saturday, and that actually works on an astrological basis. And Sunday as the day of the sun, looking forward, I will have had enough time to like think about the next couple of months now that I'm back here. That's cool. I mentioned that on, so 9th house is my sun because it's Cancer and Venus. So my home and heart are on the road, like I said. I did visit the witches market in the past multiple times. My best find in the witches market is actually Mario. He's my Kayawaya because he lives in La Paz most of the time and works there. I'll tell you this about the witches market. I thought it was shit my first couple of visits because it was just touristy tat. And I bought a whole bunch of it, having just said that about tapestries and so on. Because in fact, some of it was really good, like my alpaca poncho and so on. But it's not just the 2 main streets. Like the Mario and the other Kayawaya were operating in like a little courtyard off one of the other streets. So in terms of finds, the best things that I bought there are, and there will be a video about this, are the despacho kits for Pachamama. And it's like a stack of white candies and things that you lay out for your despacho. And I managed to bring one of them back with me. But my best finds in the witches markets were actually nice things like, hang on, let me see if I've... So this, I'll have to stand back, so I'm going to explain it now. But this is the tapestry that I bought in the witches market that is going to go where the suns are. But like... So the best thing that I bought in the witches market, I mean, it is magical. There's a shikana and whatever in the middle, but not like, I bought like a monkey's paw or some kind of shit. And that was because all that sort of stuff, how to say this right? The witches market was kind of commodified so that every store would have hanging in the front the llama fetuses to attract tourists, and it would have the different despacho kits, and it would have the cheap different soaps and colognes that are made in Brazil for like Afro-Caribbean magic and so on, which is all very well and good. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it was once I saw where Mario was operating that the whole kind of market unlocked a bit more of like, oh, now I know what I'm looking at. Now the locals come here to buy this, and then I would see them in alleys getting their cards read. I showed pictures of it. So the witches market took a while to get my head around, but I quite enjoyed it. Like the actual shopping there in terms of buying local artisanal products is actually quite good. So we bought like alpaca wool ponchos and sweaters and things. And they were all like properly made by indigenous people and whatever. Like it was all quite good. And the eating and drinking was kind of fun. There is a institution of a pub called the Lucky Llama, which is the highest Irish pub in the world. I don't think you can call it that if it doesn't have Guinness, which it doesn't. I think like the same thing happened because I was in Paraguay for St. Patrick's Day, and there was a pub. I think it was literally called Kilkenny. So it was a bar because they don't really do pubs. I'm like, oh, let's go there because they'll have probably Kilkenny rather than Guinness. And they're like, what? You know, it's St. Patrick's Day. Surely they have, and there's no Guinness anywhere in evidently Bolivia and Paraguay. So I don't know. I don't think you should be able to call it an Irish pub if it doesn't have some form of Irish stout on tap, which I was prepared to know. Like, don't even bother in the chat saying, oh, it won't taste right or it'll taste disgusting. I know. All right. I know. That's not the point. It's St. Patrick's Day, and there would have been something really fun about drinking a disgusting Guinness in like 33-degree heat, which would be 11 p.m. at night in Asuncion. Come on now. And same thing in Bolivia, like, oh, highest Irish pub on earth. I don't think you can call it that. It's still fun. Like, and it's where expats and backpackers and whatever hang out. There's like pool tables. They run tours from it. They actually had vegan things on the menu so I could eat. But that's a bit of an institution in the witches market. That's kind of fun and cute as well. At the other end of the witches market, there is, and I shared some of these images in the Telegram group. There was an English pub that actually kind of was English. Like, the beers were, which I didn't mind the Pesena, which is like the La Paz beer. But they had full English on the menu, which I didn't eat because plant-based. But there were English people at the next table who'd come in for like a hungover breakfast, and they ordered it. And I'm like, oh my God, that actually looks like a full English in London. And then some guy in like a zip-up fleece with like a Royal Mail insignia. So he was wearing a Royal Mail zip-up fleece, came in and had a beer. I'm like, what the, like, the Royal Mail wasn't even that good when I was in London. And you're going to tell me they get delivery? I think it's just someone who used to work for them, right? But it was okay. So at one end of the market, there was a completely fake Irish pub that was really, really fun. And at the other end, there was a not that fake English pub. And we were joking, James and I, because obviously we've eaten in one or two English pubs in our day. Our first week or so in London was a travesty of, but like a delightful travesty that happens to everyone, of getting the pub chains wrong. Like, oh, this one surely isn't a chain pub. And you'd get in there and you'd look at the menu and go, oh, it's the same menu. And it would be like a terrible like tuna sandwich and crisps. And they had similar things. So they had like a salad sandwich and like papas, like fries, in this English pub in La Paz. And it was delicious. So this is like Joe, we were like, this is actually a better English pub than many of the English pubs that have somehow managed to survive to this day, because the beers aren't as good, but the food is just leagues better, because it's eating potatoes in the Andes is as good as you think that's going to be, because of course that's where they're from. Except, having said that, something they do which I think is monstrous. They won't wash them before they bake them, right? And they essentially pick the skin off of the potato and like almost eat it like that, which I didn't the first couple of times. So I just ate a whole bunch of Andean dirt when I was in the mountains. But the skin is the best bit. And I'm whole food plant-based. I'm hungry as fuck, but that seems crazy to me. So that was surprising that in the Kayawaya villages, rather than wash them before baking them, they'll just bake them whole and kind of like peel the skin off and eat that, which I don't care for. But what I did really, really enjoy was the like black or fermented preserved, no, it's dehydrated potato. And this is an Inca tradition, because I mean, potatoes last a long enough time as it is, but they last forever if you dehydrate them, which is a process of leaving them out in the sun on top of the hills. This is the older process. And then like standing on them so they crush, and then leaving them out in the sun again. Because once you do that, you obviously open up the flesh on the inside for the sun to evaporate and they go completely black and they're squishy. They almost look like figs, like really dry, dehydrated figs. And they taste kind of like, this sounds weird, kind of like leather, but they were delicious. And I'd never seen them before, and I ate them at every opportunity. So the potato situation was fantastic. Yeah. So that's the witches market. Like, it was actually quite good eventually. I don't, like I said, I didn't see the point of La Paz, except operationally, like you have to get into the city. I spent a lot of time there, more than I needed to, because of just the gaps between James's travel and mine. So I spent more time than I needed to in La Paz. But there's nowhere else to go in Bolivia. I mean, there is. There's Santa Cruz that's down, like, basically in the Amazon. But I just needed somewhere, like, I'll tell you this, the altitude sickness is fucking real. The videos that you'll see, I am, like, panting like a nun watching porn. Like, it's just crazy. Just walking. And it's, so one of the reasons that I got there so early was to acclimate and I was very glad that I did that. But yeah, a couple of days in the witches markets and seeing some of the little valleys that look like the Valley of the Moon and the Valley of the Animals around La Paz, and then you're done. We spent too much time there because there's nothing to do, and it's sort of like a shit Quito. Like I love Quito, and Quito's like another Andean capital city, but Quito just does it better. The food is better. There's almost like more things to do. I don't know. Yeah, because I might go back, having just said that about the Huáscar fortress. In the middle, so La Paz is this kind of like long, thin city that runs down a valley from at the top where it spills out. It looks really Star Wars like, actually. As you're driving back along the Altiplano, you start to see like these really ghetto buildings, this like really Mos Eisley kind of looking hectic stuff. That's the top of El Alto. And then that kind of tumbles down into the valley, and the city sort of slides down like that along several rivers. Halfway up this monstrous thing is a place called Sopacachi, which is like the trendier. It's like it's not Centro, but it's Centro adjacent, and that's where that's where the cool kids live, right? And that's where all the restaurants, like the good restaurants and so on, are. The better hotels are further down, like in Zona Sur, in the South Zone, which is where we were staying, and that was where the good hotels. So that's fine. That's the wealthy area, and it's where the nice hotels are. And it's only like $8. It's 20 minutes, and depending on the traffic, a little bit more, but it's only like $8 in a taxi to get up into Centro. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But if I do it again, I would probably rent like an Airbnb or something in Sopacachi and spend more of my time there. But I'm not going to rush back. I did what I needed to out of Bolivia. And if Julian, who is actually half Bolivian, my translator, half Mexican friend, when he makes it back, we might do that Huáscar trip. But yeah, there are places I like better in South America. Which yard alley can Mario be found in? I would have to look it up on a map. That is sacrilege. The skin is the best. Agreed. And like, this is where potatoes are from. So I can't even like go, what are you perverts doing to potatoes? Because they can turn around and say the exact same to me with more justification. But I agree completely. Like, the skin is not just the best part. It's the part with basically all the nutrition that's in the potato, which, by the way, this is another thing you learn in whole food plant-based, like starch solution and so on. I understand why it is a sacred plant, because it is basically, it's not optimal health, but you can actually live on it in perpetuity, especially if you massage its form so that you have this dehydrated one, which changes blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But yeah, but it was delicious everywhere. So Peru has the best combination of actually really good at preparing food and really good, fresh, amazing ingredients. Peru is has all the climates. So it has the tropical fruit of the Amazon, and it has these beautiful, lush valleys coming down from the Andes to the Pacific Ocean that are very well irrigated because of, Andes mountain and so on. So if you fly south down the coast of Peru, it's like desert with these bright green valleys filled with the kind of food that you grow in that sort of warm temperate environment. And then it has a cool climate Pacific Ocean coast that is enormous, and it has the Andes. So it has all this incredible food, and particularly in Lima, it has the sentiment to that urban sentiment to turn it into fucking excellent cuisine. Bolivia has the ingredients. It does not yet have the sentiment. Like what was it called? Alipacha. Fuck. If you do go to La Paz, this was like the best vegan restaurant in all of South America. It's called Alipacha, Alipacha. And we did like the fixed course lunch, and it was fantastic. But that's like one restaurant in the whole country. Lima is not everywhere isn't like that, of course, but enough places have that level of confidence that, like, okay, we not only have amazing ingredients, we have really cool fucking chefs. And that'll just be someone like as a street vendor. That won't just be whatever. So that's where Bolivia is like, I say this with love, like it's a shit Peru. It's because it's got Andes and whatever, but it doesn't yet have, history hasn't allowed for it to develop that same kind of, hasn't developed in the same way that Peru has. They both have the same problem with like imperialism and resources, right? Like famously, who was it that described Peru as a beggar sitting on a bench of gold? But particularly in Lima, there is more of that cultural confidence in like a contemporary Peru, which hopefully Bolivia will develop. Because I was like that usual story of like, oh, the people are so lovely and so on. Like, yeah, it's just the modern governmental history has not been great. And that's flowed down in less pleasant ways in Bolivia than, and the stark contrast with Paraguay, which is still really libertarian and culturally so. So even like young people aren't the same sort of purple-haired Borg socialists. They are actually interested and proud of the centering of personal freedoms in Paraguay. So it's just going from this lawless pirate dystopia to somewhere where someone will randomly want your fucking passport to refuel a rental car that you're paying cash for. It's like, what? Why? Who are you to ask for my fucking passport? And it's like that internalized tyranny, I just react more and more to for obvious reasons after the last few years. I'm like, you know what? This is unpleasant. So that is a necessary cost of visiting Bolivia. The Aymara culture, Lake Titicaca, Tiwanaku, astounding. Obviously, the mountains, all of that. But when I say it's a garbage country, that's the police checks, the endless police checks in the fucking like dirt roads at 4,700 meters. Police checks. Fuck you. Like, you think you can stop any of that cocaine? Like, it was just that got a bit exhausting. And so but that's a cost of, that's adventure, right? Like, if I would like to smooth those edges out, I could have gone on a fucking coach tour with a whole bunch of fat Americans, right? But I didn't. Fat enough. All right. Roasting potatoes in fireplace is divine. My Ecuadorian husband loves to do that. See, all right. Out there in the main room of the wizard hut, there's a little fire, which is used for heat. And it's one of the ones where you put the fireplace at the top and like the oven area is a second door. Oh, knocked over the tea. There's a second door that swings open there that usually is made for bread. And as I was in the mountains last month, and watching them roast the potatoes over the fire before peeling them like perverts, I'm like, oh my God, when I get back to the wizard hut, it will be cold, which means I'll have the fire on. And especially in a whole food plant-based year, potatoes rather than flour, like wheat flour. Oh, I'm just gonna roast potatoes in my, like, at 10 a.m. in in the morning while I'm using the fire to heat the wizard hut, because the heat's being used anyway. And I'm irrationally excited to do that. It's still actually, because it's wet, it's still a bit warm. So it's not quite fire weather in the wizard hut, but it's not far off. And I will be doing exactly that. I will be cooking potatoes in my, like, heating fire, I guess. So I just spilled the tea, but the thing about mate, so the thing about tereré is it actually, like, it absorbs the water so that it becomes like a green gloop. So there's no water on the table. Done. I'm craving potatoes now. Me too. I think I'm going to end up making that this evening. But one of the things coming back to, and I'll do a video about this probably next month, because there's a backlog of all the South America stuff, and I've got to do the course. I promised, like, to do a reasoning and logic of the whole food plant-based year, kind of like what I did for alcohol. But one of the things, the difference between whole food plant-based and vegan is, in this case, it's supposed to be salt-free and oil-free, when I can cook for myself is fine. When you're traveling and you have to eat vegan food, it's generally anything in a restaurant, especially vegan stuff, like, it's going to be falafel, which sounds like, okay, cool, I can have chickpea, but like, it's deep fried in oil and covered in salt. And it's like, so it's not actually what you're supposed to have. Consequently, when I went whole food plant-based in whatever it was, September, October of last year, when I last got back from Paraguay, there was an adjustment down as you remove oil and salt from what you're cooking. And all the videos I watched online said it takes about 2 weeks and then you normalize to it. And then when you encounter oil in particular, it's disgusting, which is true. And anything that has too much, which is to say any added salt, basically tastes like, what the fuck is happening here? Did I just drink the ocean? If you go off that eating plan like I have, because I haven't been able to control the food in Bolivia or Brazil or whatever that I was eating, one of the things I suggest you do when you come back to it is to basically spend a week doing the starch solution diet, which is essentially just eating potatoes and sweet potatoes, just baked, right? And something about that sounds delicious, but what that does is it resets the taste buds back to a oil-free, salt-free situation. So next week I will probably do something like that, where it's just oil and salt-free. It's going to be that anyway, but with the beginning of the fireplace and talking about potatoes, I'm like, maybe I will just do like 4 or 5 days of the starch solution to reset back down. Because I tell you, like it's getting cold here. I'm in the Southern Hemisphere. I'll have a fire on. I'm like, man, what is stopping me eating like baked potato in the morning? Like nothing. I was just doing that in the mountains. So yes, minus think I just picked up some coconut garlic potatoes at the food bank. I've never heard of that, but yeah, cool. Coconut garlic potatoes. See, I love coconut. I can't have because of the saturated fat whole food plant-based situation, which is like not this year anyway, which is sad because like it's the best food on earth. No other way to describe that. What I like, if it wasn't in a non-whole food plant-based context, I do. It does have garlic in it, I suppose, but almost like a dauphinoise potato, but it's sweet potato sliced and cooked in coconut milk with chili and a little bit of garlic. But you just stick that in the oven because the only thing that I actually think I like sweet potato more than potato, but that's basically what you have there. I used to live on baked sweet potatoes. They had to find. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do most of the time down here because you stick them in just for a little bit longer. Done. And the best way of doing it from a overall perspective, which I again can't do this year because of the salt, is like get a sweet potato, prick it with a fork, wet it and cover it in salt, and then just stick that in for 90 minutes or whatever in the oven because the skin does that crispy thing and the inside basically becomes pudding. Like it just becomes squishy. You think you're overcooking it, but you're not. And then you end up with the super salty skin, which is delicious, but too high in salt. And yeah, so I still do that just without the salt. Don't know if it's the length of the facial hair or the tan, but you're getting hotter, Gordon. Yeah, I am. So I'm moving into a more millennial beard situation where it's going to be rather than like a season 2 onwards William Riker all in one length. Like I was thinking about this when I'm wearing. Like, no, I'm going to grow longer here, so it'll be more millennial, I guess. But also I did get some sun, I suppose. I do have a handmade leather feltish kind of hat, which I got in Paraguay. I thought I had it up here. No. I have look, I live somewhere cold, so it doesn't matter. And I did buy it from the Aymara person who made it, but like a Inca hat with the thing down the side, and it's reversible. And you best believe I will be wearing that out and about in Tasmania in the winter, because why not? Same thing. The poncho situation was interesting because it's a problematic item of clothing potentially to wear. And which I did, like wandering through the witches market looking for them, you can get some really touristy ones, which I think are quite problematic. And in fact, I go into stores and they'd show me, oh, what about this one? And you'd see the color and it would be nice. And then they'd pull it out and it would be like a North American wolf howling at the moon, or like a full, like, when I say this, you understand that I mean it in the dated problematic context, like a full red Indian big chieftain, like, all right, that one's not for me. right? Which is a pity because the colors and patterns were good, and you'd find ones that have like alpacas or whatever on them, but there'd be something not correct somewhere in that combination. What I was looking for is because I would see people out in the countryside in the Altiplano wearing them. It's like, where the hell are the ones that are just like black with a stripe or two of them made in alpaca wool? And I found one of them. So I have one that isn't like this glaring touristy look at me that says like, Peru or Bolivia on it. But I have one that if this farm was on the Altiplano, I would wear out and about in the fields. And yes, I'm going to wear it because it's just like black alpaca wool, and I can't wait. I honestly can't wait for it to be that cold. But that has been the most fraught. So now I have two ponchos, one of them which I got to graduate from. So that's Peruvian, and it's Caro made. So I have a ceremonial poncho that I use in the fire pit that's out there, not in the fire pit, but when it's outside ceremonies in the cold. But but it's funny because it's not warm because it's woven as this nice red pattern one, whereas the one that I bought in Bolivia is alpaca wool, black, woolen, warm. I can't wait. Yeah. All right. The solar looking stuff, those are the three suns. So it's a Inca sun, a Guanche sun, and an Aztec sun, and it's by a Colombian artist. I bought them for up here in the Wizard Hut, and just when I moved everything up here, I thought, like, they look cute behind me, but they're kind of a bit too small for the camera stuff, which is why the big tapestry is going to go there, and these three are going to go 1, 2, 3 down the wall there, because I love them. It's just it's not quite, there's too much, if you're looking at this, which you are now, there's too much space behind me that isn't, yeah. When it was downstairs in the old office, like, it was just the books behind me, I didn't have to think about it. Now I have to think about it because I have a whole library next door, which is where all my books are. What are my favorite plant allies? Ayahuasca, chamomile, which I've spoken about a lot. Wish I got that one because of ayahuasca. Palo Santo, eucalypt, terere, and also mate, boldo, similarly. Yeah. So cannabis, I don't resonate with. Obviously, I'm very pro like legalization, et cetera, et cetera. I've never been able to enjoy cannabis. My autonomic system regulates towards the sympathetic, and people who don't enjoy cannabis, the ones who get like anxious, because it's funny, like, you'll have friends, or it might be you, because like, I don't understand why people get anxious and weird on it. Like, I just feel normal. It levels me out. People who respond positively to cannabis typically are parasympathetically dominant rather than sympathetically dominant, so that it has a sympathetic uplift effect that brings people towards normal. If you're above normal, like if you're sympathetic, it sends you that way, and I do not enjoy it. And I, now knowing that, I'm like, this makes complete sense to me. It makes complete sense to me now. So whilst I am absolutely pro everyone doing whatever the fuck they want with consenting adults and substances, and so will always be pro legalization, personally, it's not a vibe for me. How's the book coming along? Will we be traveling some more for it? Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Because like, I need to now write it. So second half of the year is going to be the blended cycle model and writing the book. That's the plan. That being said, there are war-based reasons. There's more stuff. That's the wrong way of saying it, although it will be triggered by that. I don't rule out another trip back to South America this year, but I'm not planning on it. It may be something that is necessary responding to conditions. But other than that, like, I'll tell you this, Tasmania is a wonderful place to be in the winter, even when the threat of nuclear war, the literal other side of the world, isn't looming, because it's just lovely. Like, it's cold, but it's not prohibitively cold like Alaska or something. So yeah, there's fireplaces and clean air, and it's quiet and so on. This is a really lovely place to spend the winter. So I'm not desirous of going anywhere else unless I have to, but it's one of those famous last words type things. Yeah. I excited for the blended cycle model course. Yeah, me too. I'm already like, so I'm a week and a half ahead of the filming of the videos for the course. So the intro stuff all comes out this weekend, probably Sunday for most of you. And then like we did with the prayer course, then each week, the next kind of chunk or module will come out. So I'm like a little bit ahead. I'm loving the Grimoire course. I'm very proud of it. So it's a good year for Rune Soup courses, put it that way. The Grimoire course and the blended cycle model course, I'm very excited for. So you resonate with cannabis and really use it. Yeah. Oh, psilocybin mushrooms are powerfully important to me, and I have grown them before. But I'm interestingly like, so I was just in South America, and I think this is the first time, or was last time, I went without ayahuasca. And I just, at the moment, I'm not, when I say I'm not called to psychedelics, I don't need them. There's nothing in my life that needs psychedelic medicine at the moment. So I love psilocybin, and I used to, there have been years of my life where I will do that quarterly at least as a way of managing depression symptoms. But I, especially in this whole food plant-based and post taking a year of alcohol, but especially whole food plant-based, I don't need it. I have found a way to regulate all of that kind of stuff without it. And I do my own journeying and dream work anyway. So I love psilocybin mushrooms, and I like it even recreationally. And it's been very powerful for me. But yeah, I think it's going to be like, because I was drinking, I say way more. At the beginning of the year, I thought I was going to maybe drink 4 times this year. That was not, because that was not what happened in South America. There was a night of drinking with Julio, and like in Paraguay with friends, I would drink a couple of times a week. When I say drink a couple of times a week, like we had 2 or 3 beers. It's not like I was getting on it. But that's still way more than I expected to be drinking. So now that I'm back, I'm very much looking forward to returning to the eating plan and just staying off everything basically for I'm probably, like, my birthday's at the end of June, 28, as in years old. I'm probably going to do dry June up until, like, if I go visit my family for my birthday or something, I might have a wine. But I'm just really looking forward to, it's winter. I'm really looking forward to that kind of turning inward, drinking tea by the fireplace, reading kind of vibe. So yeah. You're in the process of getting a psychedelic therapy facilitator certification. Good for you. Good for you. It's definitely a growth industry, and an industry that so I've participated in some psychedelic therapy conferences and know people in that space. And there are some real problems with MAPS and Rick Doblin and imperialism and materialism and so on at the moment, which I'm sure you're aware of, getting the facilitator certification. The thing is, I think there's some stuff about Rick Doblin that's going to come out that won't be good, but leaving him aside from a personality basis, the only way out is through with this stuff. Like, and I've heard people who've been part of the Johns Hopkins research say the same thing, which is like, listen, we know that the right way of doing this is in nature, in groups. Legally you would lose, you would be fired or whatever. You'd lose your license to practice as a psychologist if you took your patients out in groups to a park and held their hands and had them all hold their hands whilst participating in a therapy session. Like, the legal framework for how we do therapy is one therapist, one patient in a fucking room for an hour, right? And it's almost like you have to change the laws to get different medicines into a system where they probably shouldn't be consumed first, and see that the world doesn't end before changing the other part of it. So good luck. We need people who are willing to play the longer game to bring back more shamanic versions of healing into a system that is just, it's not relational enough to allow for these beings to be the medicines that they are. Yeah. Next animism video. What's the next? I don't know yet. And I don't know yet because actually one of them is going to be on quests and one of them is going to be on time. And I need to work out how they're going to be, because obviously the blended cycle model is time magic. Like it's probably what I'll end up calling it rather than the blended cycle model, because we know what I mean by that, but other people won't. So quests and time are going to be in the next animism series, but I won't know which stuff goes in those videos until I've planned the blended cycle model course, which I won't do until I finish the Grimoire course, which will be in June. So ask me in June, which you'll be able to do because this won't be every Friday. This will probably be fortnightly. But now that I am back here for the winter and I have like a reliable setup, there will be more of these, put it that way. I'd love to deep dive more, but really appreciate that shout out. Yeah, listen, so I've had a bunch of people on the show. There's a whole bunch of psychedelics, like if you episodes, and I do want to revisit it. Actually, yes. So Reverend Danny Nemu, who's on, very much sees the shortcomings of the psychedelic industry in the same way I do. So, and I do want to get back to that because there's some stuff. This is the Rick Dublin stuff. There's some tea there that I think is going to be spilled, that I think needs to be spilled. Yeah, not so much. It's like, do you want to cancel someone? It's not canceled so much as, yeah, it's too long to go into for now. Yeah. How do I think psychic questings weave into adventure as epistemology? I did not include that. That being said, I do have an episode coming up with Paul Weston, the unofficial mayor of Glastonbury. And we've spoken about psychic questing at length there because he was friends with, and is still friends with, Andy Collins in the 90s when Andy Collins was really big into that stuff. And even though some of Andy Collins' history I don't think is correct at all, he inarguably pioneered which is called that, right? Psychic questing. He inarguably pioneered a system of developing psychic questing is a very specific form of epistemology, which is an example of what we were just talking about as adventurous epistemology. So that in many respects was an oversight, but an oversight I can correct because I will be having Paul on the show soon enough, to be honest. Any suggestions for Latin American Helm Deep going to bug out and I'm drowning in options? This comes back to everyone gets an apocalypse. So remember that Brazil got caught planning its programmable digital currency. So it depends what risk you're trying to mitigate. I happen to think, so in general, South America is a really good place to be because the nuclear war that's going to happen is Northern Hemisphere. So South America and Africa ain't nobody bombing either of them, right? Everyone else at least is at risk of getting the bomb treatment. So the whole continent satisfies that scenario. Next on the list depends on your own risk profile, and like I struggle to provide individual advice outside of that, right? Because there are countries I like and there are countries I don't who have things wrong with, well, they all have things wrong with them. Every country does. So you're looking in the right area, but the next sort of apocalypse, like, are you in your 60s and you require access to allopathic medication because of dialysis? That will rule out. Well, that rules Brazil back in, which means then you have to manage like, okay, well, I'm going to have a programmable digital currency. Do you know what I mean? Like once you get down to an individual basis, I can tell you that no one's going to bomb South America with nuclear bombs. Everything else is your own situation underneath that. I'm looking at Argentina. Argentina is not a bad option. It does collapse. I think they all kind of do, but Argentina is actually quite a good option. Yeah, but there is, as you say, there's loads of fair options. Yeah. Oh, cool. Me and Karen Boyer. That's lovely. All right. Well, all right, guys. I'm going to wait for another moment or two to see if there are any other questions. We don't have nuclear bombs, but narco-terrorism. See, exactly. And the thing is, not just that. So it's not just narco-terrorism. As the United States cuts itself off from where it previously gets rare earth minerals by going to war with China, the Murder Inc. process of managing the fucking South American backyard by overthrowing governments and so on is going to get worse and worse. So Argentina, for instance, the so-called libertarian Milei has agreed to allow the Americans to have a new base at the mouth of the Paraná River, which is not good for Paraguay. This is how I know about it, because of Paraguay. But there are military in Peru already, and because, of course, Peru has rare earth minerals. The Venezuela is really looking like it's about to invade Guyana again because of fuel. So it's not that you don't get to like move to South America and sit out the apocalypse. You can't sit out the apocalypse anywhere, but it doesn't get nuclear bombs. It will get collapsing governments, and fuck only knows what happens to the CIA drug trade when America gets a divorce. Like, no, who owns the CIA? I mean, it'll be America North, but like, who owns the CIA? And then what do their priorities become? And what implications does that have for their fucking drug business in 2028? When they're like, and what is the flow-on effect for the, let's say, the local component of that industry in South America when that happens? I don't know. So I love South America, obviously, and I wish it the best, Kamala wave kind of thing. But everywhere's going to have. So Africa doesn't get bombed, but Africa gets because it always does, the pointy end of the food shortages that are going to come as a result of war. And South America gets some of the bathtub sloshing around collapses and unpredictability of the resource shift that happens because of the war. Neither of them get bombed, but it doesn't mean, like, it's funny, not funny, it's awful. But like, when you think about artists and writers who fled Europe and even the US, like to Mexico for World War II, and like wrote a couple of books or did some paintings or whatever, because life just kind of carried on in a Mexican way. There is nowhere like that this time around, or I would be live streaming from there. So as long as South America is a better option than most places, but it doesn't make it an easy option, and it doesn't make it a clear option, and it doesn't make it a universal option. Like, you have to find what your constellation of those kind of things is. Yeah, Jamie saying he lives in Ecuador and I can see the movements of chess pieces. This whole narc terrorism is connected. I think the Galapagos Islands will be used as a US base against China. Interesting. I didn't give my Boeing PSYOP take. I will do that. Boeing, of course, is a major military contractor, and we're heading into war. And if you look at, it's not so much that Boeing planes are shittily built and all this stuff is going wrong. That's true of all of them. What is different this time is that the Boeing stories are the ones that are making the news. When that happens, something suspicious is going on, and it's like a hostile takeover. It's an 80s play. It's literally a 1980s play that you only put bad press out. And I've been saying this from the beginning of the Boeing bad press, and Catherine Fitz is now saying it in her weekly Money and Markets. Something isn't right with the Boeing story. Now, let me give you so remember, I guess it was earlier this year, unless it was late last year, the Boeing whistleblower who was shot in his car in South Carolina, Georgia, someone will know, who was about to testify. And everyone's like, oh, Boeing obviously killed this whistleblower, so he couldn't testify. Well, the information was already out. So I put it to you, I mean, Boeing may have, but I put it to you, like, if I was trying to collapse Boeing's share price so that I could pick it up really, really cheap, I would kill, not me, but like, I would put the hit out on a Boeing whistleblower, because what that telegraphs to the market is like, oh, what else did he know? Like, what else is Boeing really hiring? And that's exactly what happened. And then the share price came down again and again and again. So it looks to me like, now it could just be systemic incompetence, because some of the people who have looked at the management of Boeing over the last decade have showed that they've moved engineers off senior positions and off the board and replaced them with the usual like DEI, Harvard MBA nonsense that's killing all corporations. So inarguably, Boeing has not had good management over the last 10 years. And so that's clearly a factor. But there's something else going on here. And my guess, and it's just a guess, is that it's something like that, because I used to work in travel media. I have a bunch of friends who are still in the travel industry and in the airline industry specifically. Shit falls off planes all the time. Like these are mechanical objects in really stressful situations. It's just what happens. But it's just the Boeing stories that are hitting the news. That's weird. Something else is going on there. Yes, the recommended reading is coming up in videos that will be out this weekend. What's the best of South America? Paraguay, Uruguay, or Panama? Panama is not really South America. Uruguay is boring. So out of those two, like I don't see that. Uruguay is safe. So I actually have, I know expats who are leaving Europe for Uruguay because it's the Switzerland of South America. They work in finance. But I think the Switzerland, anywhere that bills itself as the Switzerland of anywhere, including Switzerland, is too boring for me. And Uruguay is one of those places that's too boring for me. Paraguay is still South American, like it's still got jaguars and hummingbirds and like is crazy and hectic. And the further north you get more of that and you get better food. So Uruguay is like the worst. It's like it's too European for me in the sense of, well, why would I live somewhere that's really expensive by South American standards? I don't work in finance. If you have a family and you just want kids to go to a stable school and you want a stable banking system, Uruguay is a really good choice. I like Kimbanda ceremonies by lakes, and I like ayahuasca, and I like jungles. And come on now. Like, so if I'm just going to live there, I'm going to live, as Jamie says, like Ecuador or somewhere. Like, you can't completely mitigate the risk in South America. You can mitigate some of it. But so then the next question is, well, what do I like? Like, what would I like to live around whilst mitigating certain risks? And for me, that will never be Uruguay. First of all, I'm pretty sure, like, I'm definitely going to be whole food plant-based for this whole year. But I feel amazing living this way. I'm pretty sure I'm done with meat, at least for the rest of my life. Like, it just does not suit. And it's not a judgment call. Like, we still have chickens. James still eats it, whatever. It does not suit my autonomic makeup at all to eat meat. Uruguay, and I don't drink that much. Uruguay is steak and wine and banking. Why would I could have crazy Russian-owned Medicos Nyana, drinking tereré in the heat, watching like rivers of garbage down the street. Like, that's my paradise. If I'm going to pick South America, it is going to be Ecuador, Peru, somewhere like that, right? Literally nobody checking for the Swiss. Can't believe they won Eurovision, a thing I didn't watch. How about Colombia? Colombia is, it's just got different risk, doesn't it? So what the end of the CIA drug trade looks like there, but also Colombia is a little bit more like Brazil in the sense that it has a propensity to get communist. So it's going to try a digital currency. It's going to try all that kind of stuff. It's just what it is, right? A couple of friends who I've talked into the big move. One is El Salvador. One wants for Peru. I figure it might not be a bad idea to have homes in various zip codes, couches, open to Rune Soup. Yeah, see, I mean, that's the dream, isn't it? Like, are we talking about selling up and moving somewhere? Or are we talking about like, oh, if you want to give me like a house in the Sacred Valley, I'm not going to say no. I mean, I won't sell the farm, but if you're going to tell me that, oh, would you also like a house in Peru? I'd be like, oh, I don't mind if I do, actually. So this is real good manifestation stuff. It's like, well, do I want to flee somewhere, or can I put that same energy into like, well, how about I own property in multiple jurisdictions? Like, how about I wealth my way into World War III. It's food for magical thought, particularly for people who are doing, people who are doing the sigil course or the sigil a day project rather. Argentina is borderline too boring for me. Interesting. I could see that truly, like, because me the same. I get that. If people want to argue the case for like, yes, but Buenos Aires, which is true, is like, it's a really cool cultural city, all that kind of stuff. That's not, and that's all true. If someone wants to justify Argentina to me as not being boring for them, I would agree. But I'm in your camp. I'm like, listen, if the choice, it is a non-choice for me to, not that I'm going to move to either of these places, but it's a non-choice for me if it was living in Peru or Argentina. It's a non-choice. Like, it's Peru all day. Just as an example. Yeah. Peso to dollar arbitrage can't be beat. For now, yeah. Milei might actually get further along into dollarization. This is the trouble with Ecuador for me. It will have to come off the dollar because the dollar is going to not so much go away, but stop being the reserve currency. But Milei may have timed things so poorly, not his own fault, not that I love the guy, that he might actually get Argentina onto a dollar or a dollar peg just as the dollar goes away. And it's like, come on now. Perhaps it's the jet lag, but you seem chatty and a bit frantic. Well, I've been talking for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I have been up for like 10, and I've had quite a bit of caffeine. All right. Private equity is killing a lot of businesses. Lots of stuff is. Well, all right, guys. We did good. 2 hours. We did really good. 2 hours, 42 minutes. And I'm just going to wait one more second in case another like, no, please wait. I need this answer. Thanks for the work, Gordon. Hope you, get to see you in person again. Won't be long, one way or the other. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to, oh no, my mouse is timed out. Next time we do this, because I have the new Mac, the other devices, it'll be a more professional, setup next time we do this. But thank you guys, and I will see you in the next one.